Chapter 9:22 Mushrooms and Fish. Looking at the lights that emitted out of the oriel window, the hooded and masked Alger was just about to ask about the details of the operation, when he suddenly saw a shadow grow out of the rich darkness. It materialized as a lanky, pale, sickly young man. Bloodless Heath Doyle. Alger quickly recognized the man to be the second mate of the future. Heath didn't look at him as he directly said to Catlia, "Captain, they didn't notice anything and turned those mushrooms into cream of mushroom soup. They plan to use the prepared pan-fried fish as tonight's main course." "Excellent." Catlia removed the heavy glasses on her nose and used her eyes, which had a mysterious purple hue, to look through the neighboring house's dining hall across the walls. Heath Doyle didn't speak further as his body instantly darkened and returned to the shadows. It was unknown where he had slunk to. After hearing their conversation, and combining it with what Ma'am Hermit had previously mentioned, Alger had a rough idea of the core element to tonight's operation. Mushrooms. Poisonous mushrooms. Although he didn't know what method Admiral of Stars was using to cause the spiritual intuition of the Beyonders inside to be ineffective and not be able to distinguish normal mushrooms from poisonous mushrooms, Alger believed that there was nothing impossible in mysticism. He hesitantly said, "Will this cause Artisan Sealf's death?" Unaffiliated artisans were rather rare, so Alger didn't wish to lose such a friend if there was still room for turning things around. To him, the best case was to imprison the fellow and make him the exclusive artisan for both him and the hermit. "No." Catlia calmly shook her head as she explained, "Be it from the information you gave and the observations of my crew, there's one point to take note of. Sealf doesn't like fish and he even hates it. This might have to do with him getting a fish bone stuck in his throat when he was young. And it was because of this matter that Catlia ultimately chose the mushroom strategy. This could effectively reduce the enemy's effective strength while allowing their side to minimize any risks. The dark environment bred mushrooms that devoured flesh and blood, and were the first to be eliminated by Admiral of Stars, because they could let Beyonders with sharp spiritual perception sense something amiss. This was akin to facing something poisonous. In addition, Beyonders who believed in the primordial moon had a rather deep understanding of herbs, plants, and fruits. Relying on visual observation, they were likely able to identify mushrooms that posed danger. To trick them, the only way was for the food to be harmless itself. Only through its contact with something else did a mutation occur. Based on this, the mushrooms previously created by Frank were perfect. If the two conditions of fish and water weren't met, the mushrooms were ordinary mushrooms. They could neither poison a person to death or cause diarrhea. It would be digested bit by bit, and be broken down into its different components before being expelled by the body. At this point, any more fish and water was useless. For this, Catlia specially got Frank to temporarily abandon his experiment, and had obtained a batch of mushrooms. She also promised to hunt an Aurora Order Rose Bishop for him. "Hates fish," Alger whispered, feeling like he couldn't keep up with the hermit's thought process. He had clearly asked if the poisonous mushrooms could cause Artisan Sealf's death, but the answer he received was that the artisan wouldn't die because he didn't like fish and even hated it. Is there some connection between the two? Alger questioned inwardly in puzzlement, but he didn't say it out loud. He maintained his silence and planned to observe more and take note. After a while, there were screams from inside the house, followed by pangs of painful grunts and vomiting begin. Catlia issued an order in an abnormally succinct manner. Her figure instantly turned transparent, turning into a sculpture formed by countless stars. The sculpture shattered instantly as bright stars surged towards the house's door and drilled through a gap. As stars gathered inside, Catlia's figure materialized. Then, she heard howling winds and sounds of collisions. The door frame shook before the door opened. Wearing a hood and mask, Alger entered the targeted building not much slower than Admiral of Stars. He swept his gaze and quickly took in the situation at the dining hall. Artisan Sealf was retreating from the table, with a look of horror. On the ground were two men and a woman who were constantly vomiting mushrooms. At their chests, their clothes had ripped apart as one mushroom after another sprouted. Upon sensing someone enter, they subconsciously looked up, revealing bunches of white spores on their faces. Under his mask, Alger's face involuntarily twitched. Although he was experienced and knowledgeable, And with him being a beyonder who had his fair share of experience seeing horrifying scenes, such a scene still left a striking visual and mental impact on him. Katlia had expected it, but she had never expected such a harrowing sight. After a moment of surprise, she held her right hand to her mouth and blew a whistle. Illusory ropes emerged from the ground and coiled around the 3 primordial moon believers like snakes. "Is there a way to stop this?" Katlia said to the shadow in the corner. After a moment of silence, Heath Doyle's voice sounded. Frank said that he hadn't obtained a way to stop it in his experiments. "The only way is cremation." Cremation? Katlia's brows quivered. Immediately, she took out some powder from a pocket and threw them out. The powder seemed to have a life of their own, as they accurately landed on the 3 primitive believers and the various mushrooms. Silently, they burst into scarlet flames and silently burned whatever they touched. Artisan Sealf was already dumbstruck from witnessing the mutation. When someone intruded, he had thought of resisting using his mystical item, but he quickly recognized the intruder to be Admiral of Stars Katlia. Hence, he wisely gave up and stood in his spot, waiting. He knew that he was of significant value. No matter where he went, he was not someone who would immediately be killed. Furthermore, Admiral of Stars never had any infamy to her name. Worst comes to worst, I'll just have to join the Star Pirates. Besides, this pirate admiral seems to be more beautiful than the bounty notices. She exudes a completely different air. Sealf tugged at his wolf fang necklace and forced a smile, awaiting the intruder to mention her purpose. Katlia glanced at him and seriously observed his appearance. All she could confirm was that he was a classic example of someone from Intis, but she failed to find any similarities to Queen Mystic. The pirate admiral deliberated and said, "I had been introduced by a friend, hoping to get you to create a mystical item, but I later discovered that you were with some primordial moon believers. The 3 of them aren't too strong and couldn't restrain you at all. Why do you still remain here?" In this operation, Katlia's main hypothetical enemy was actually the artisan himself. This was because she could neither kill him or control him. Furthermore, he still had many well-matched mystical items, making him a powerful enemy. Yet, things developed smoothly to her surprise. Sealf said with a smile. "They had strong ones in biome in the beginning. Using particular floral fragrances and powders, they infected me with a strange ailment, making me increasingly weaker." Katlia casually sized him up and said, "You have already recovered, so why aren't you taking this opportunity to escape?" Alger stood by the side silently. He didn't say a word, afraid that his voice might betray him. Artisan Sealf chuckled and said, "While I was under their control, they told me that as long as I believed in the primordial moon, I could use certain rituals to treat my chronic illness. I couldn't resist the temptation and tried it, and it really succeeded. I found the feeling of being a man again." Having said that, he came to an abrupt halt, realizing that he had said too much, exposing his secret illness. This is him letting himself go too far when it comes to women. Thus slowly losing his abilities in bed? Alger chuckled inwardly. Sealf looked up and glanced at them. Seeing that no one was mocking him, he coughed slightly and continued, "It wasn't something that relied on medicine. I really recovered my young, virile state. Later, I had 2 dreams of a moon that was bloody and very enticing. I believed that I had already become a believer of the primordial moon. Therefore, I didn't dare to escape." Katlia and Alger silently exchanged gazes, simultaneously passing the death sentence on him. As long as someone truly believed in an evil god, devil, or some other secret existence, unless they were willing to continue in the faith and slowly become crazier, there was no regret. Even if they were protected by official Beyonder factions and didn't suffer any problems for prolonged periods, they might end up strangling themselves in their sleep years later. This was nearly unsalvageable, unless they earned the right to receive the blessings of a grounded angel like a pope of a major church, or if they accepted being isolated by certain sealed artifacts and live underground forever. Of course, under such situations, there were also many who did nothing and managed to live to a ripe old age before dying a natural death. However, they were mostly ordinary people, targets that the evil gods, devils, and hidden existences easily ignored. As for Sealf, he was a very useful artisan. Katlia didn't mention the primordial moon believers again. To her, it wasn't a big problem whether the artisan believed in an evil god. As long as he could be communicated with to reach a deal for cooperation, and not go crazy from time to time, the other matters weren't something a pirate needed to be worried about. She switched topics and said, "What mystical items do you have now? I'll choose a few and leave you with the rest." Towards such a development, Artisan Sylph wasn't too surprised. She was a pirate, not a policewoman. Doing a heist in passing was extremely normal. For her to leave him some items was something he should earnestly thank her for. In fact, with his level and items, it was possible for him to successfully escape if he went all out, but he lacked the courage. All right. Sylph took out a pair of grayish-white glasses from his breast pocket. Gargoyle glasses. As long as sight lines are met, it can cause the other party to turn numb all over as though they are being petrified. There are two negative effects. First, if one wears it and looks into a mirror, one will turn numb as well. Second, one's body will turn heavy, making one unagile. Isn't that the item I reserved? So it has already been made. Looking at the artisan, Alger couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Chapter 923 After Effects. Sylph didn't notice the change in Alger's eyes. He pointed at one of the cremated primordial moon believers and said, "That cane was taken from me. It's called Word of the Sea. It can release lightning at a target. Waving it and striking it will cause it to be augmented with wind blades. Apart from that, it can also create large water spheres and corrosive rainwater. It can also allow the wielder to not be afraid of deep-sea pressure. They can freely extract oxygen from the water. At the same time, it can also be used as a wand to provide flight. There are 3 negative side effects. First, it enjoys singing. Every 6 hours, it has to belt out a song. The resulting effects don't discriminate between friend or foe. Due to the different choices of songs and styles, it can make one's mind go adrift or have one's mind and soul shocked, and at other times cause one to be irascible and be in a state of lowered reason. Of course, even without waiting 6 hours, it will also be very willing to sing if you so desire. Second, you can probably tell that it's equipped with living characteristics. Furthermore, it's one that is rather testy. It enjoys tripping, beating, or pulling the wielder downstairs when they aren't paying attention. Third, it will cause the wielder to easily be struck by lightning. Therefore, on stormy days, either don't go out or don't bring it along. This is the sealed artifact that was made from Gehrman Sparrow's Ocean Songster Beyonder characteristic. If you were to know that you had already made it and had allowed the primordial moon believer to take it away, you will definitely be sold to someone who is in need of you. In the form of a Beyonder characteristic, Alger looked towards the dining table and saw the black silver inlaid cane. From what he knew, regardless of whether the other negative effects were severe, mystical items with living characteristics were considered sealed artifacts. This was because there were unpredictable dangers associated with them. With Katlia and her companion not telling him that he was done, Sylph could only continue taking out mystical items with a glum face. This short knife is called Blade of Poison. The effects are obvious. There's no need for me to give any additional information, right? Every time it deals damage, it will add on a random poison. As for what it is, it's all luck. Its negative effects aren't too serious. It will only cause medical treatment to fail, and the feeling of being drunk to accumulate within the wielder. Sylph continued introducing a few mystical items and finally heard Katlia say, "Excellent, the rest are yours." Phew. She still left me with 3. Not only did Sylph not bear a grudge, he felt deep down how nice a person Admiral of Stars was. It was as though he had suffered some psychological ailments. Katlia then turned to look at the hanged man. "You pick first." She knew that the World Gehrman Sparrow had commissioned a mystical item to be made by the artisan. Therefore, the hanged man had to first select the crazy adventurer's item first. Alger nodded and took the Word of the Sea and the gargoyle glasses. Then he indicated that the rest were spoils of war. Katlia thought for a moment and said, "Pick another one. The rest will be mine." She wasn't too interested in the remaining mystical items because she had 2 rather powerful items that suited her. She had also obtained the Scales of Luck and Judge button later, thus covering all her bases. Under such a situation, the stacking of negative effects was something to be considered. Unless it was something extremely special, it wasn't something she would take a second look or choose to exchange. Of course, as a pirate admiral, she never found mystical items too excessive. After all, she had to hand over some of them to the Moses ascetic order, and leave the rest to reward her crew. Alger fell silent for a moment. Starting from what items and beyonder powers he had, he chose the blade of poison. Following that, Catlia instructed Bloodless Heath Doyle to move the mystical items that Sealf had placed on the ground, and the remnant items left by the primordial moon believers, out of the room. Then, she looked at the artisan with her dark purple-hued eyes. Why do the primordial moon believers want to control you? Sealf's eyes flickered. Isn't that simple and obvious? To get me to make mystical items for them. Just as he said that, his heart skipped a beat as a result of the purple eyes that were coldly looking at him. He hurriedly added, they also seem to have some plan that needs the help of an artisan. As for what it is, I've no idea because it hasn't started. Catlia retracted her gaze while seemingly in thought. Exchanging a silent look with the hanged man, they nodded simultaneously. They decided not to take away the artisan today, and to leave him there to monitor the subsequent developments. In other words, they wanted to figure out the primordial moon believers' plans for monitoring him. Actually, for the hermit and the hanged man, whatever the primordial moon believers were plotting wasn't something they cared about. They just each had matters they were concerned about. The former used it to communicate with Queen Mystic, to provide her reference material for her strategies in the supernatural world. The latter could use this matter to earn contribution points from the church. Therefore, they had instantly come to a tacit agreement to investigate deeper. Of course, Alger always believed in a principle. The more information he wielded, the more benefits he could obtain from various matters. After a brief silence, Catlia said to Artisan Sealf in the same tone, since you're already a primordial moon believer, taking you with me provides me with no benefit. Sealf nodded immediately, agreeing with what she said. Catlia paused for a moment before she said, however, I wish to establish a long-term working relationship with you. Therefore, I need a few drops of your blood. This will aid me in finding you at any time. Sealf wore a miserable look as his lips quivered, but he was unable to object to it. Phew. He suddenly exhaled and said, okay. With that said, he picked up a paper cutter beside him and sliced his forearm, letting a few drops of blood drip out. Catlia immediately raised her right arm and gently flicked her wrist, causing the few drops of blood to float and fly towards her. After observing the blood in her palm, this pirate admiral suddenly asked, what's your last name? June, Sealf replied instinctively. Catlia didn't say a word as she turned around and walked out the door. Alger followed closely behind. The room quickly turned silent as Sealf sat on the sofa. He sat there motionless for quite a while, as though he was deep in thought over the encounter, being unable to extricate himself from it. 10 minutes later, he suddenly stood up and took out a small human-shaped figurine from his inside pocket. The figurine was brass-colored, and its face was empty. Blood slowly seeped out from it, and remained on its surface. Sealf hurriedly wiped the figurine's face with a handkerchief before heaving a sigh of relief. He curled the corners of his lips and silently muttered, thankfully I have this fate puppet. Humph, let's see how you can find me with those drops of blood. Don't even think of cursing me. In the poverty-stricken district of Byam, on a street without any street lamps, the masked and hooded Alger looked at the hermit beside him. With a deep voice he said, after Sealf escaped from the Church of Steam, he has been living safe and sound to this day. This means he's not a fool. For him to so easily give you the blood in such a relaxed manner without putting up any resistance means that he has the means to avoid your tracking. Besides, he didn't mention an explanation of how the primordial moon believers found him. Logically speaking, the believers definitely would have asked him for the origins of the werewolf beyonder characteristic, but Sealf hadn't mentioned Alger at all. As Catlia took out the pair of heavy glasses and wore it, she said without a change in tone, it isn't used for tracking. Alger nodded in thought before bidding her farewell. Turning into a dark alley, he made several detours and found a chance to remove his disguise before leaving Byam. After he returned to the Resistance's private harbor, He boarded the Blue Avenger. His sailors had pretty much spent most of their energy and money over the past few days. So at that moment, they were all on the ship, waiting to set off for the seas again. Upon seeing him return, one of the sailors stood up immediately and asked with a smile, "Captain, have you had dinner?" "Not yet. Make something simple for me." For the operation, Alger hadn't had a chance to fill his stomach. The sailor, who also did some cooking on the side, immediately replied, "All right. We got some fresh mushrooms in the forest today. How about I pan-fry it with some butter?" Alger's face twitched as he shook his head with a normal expression. Searing a steak would do. Medium rare, a medium done. East Balam, by the periphery of a forest. With his 2 marionettes, Klein wasn't in a rush to leave. He entered a city and planned on getting some dyes to disguise Admiral Hell Ludwell's mask. And before that, he had other things to do. It was to seek out a helper for his exploration of the periphery of Calderon. Klein was never a lone wolf, and it was even more so the case when faced with danger. Therefore, unless he had no options, he would always invite powerhouses to provide him with help by sharing the coordinates and paying the corresponding price. He wasn't one to rashly enter. To him, being able to obtain the desired ingredient while alive was most important. If it wasn't because I know it's impossible, I'd even wish to wait 1 to 2 weeks before I carry a baby or push a pram to head for Calderon. Klein sighed silently as he took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew into it. Silently, Rionette Tinker with her 4 heads in hand walked out of the void. Klein deliberated over his words and said, "I plan on exploring Calderon City soon. Well, I've already obtained its coordinates in the spirit world. I'm wondering if I can hire you for your help. What would be the price?" The 4 heads in Rionette Tinker's hand spoke one after another. "Won't do. I can't enter." Chapter 9:24 First key factor, at carrying out risky operations can't enter. The 7 lights can't enter for some special reason. Is this a restriction Calderon City has on higher-level creatures in the spirit world? However, how does Miss Messenger know of this limitation? Has she been there before? If that were the case, I didn't even need to ask Red Light or the magic mirror. Perhaps her spiritual intuition told her that? As his mind whirred, Klein slowly and silently exhaled. He then took out a gold coin and handed it to Rionette Tinker. "I understand. Thank you for the information." After one of Miss Messenger's head bit on the gold coin and retreated into the spirit world, Klein allowed his thoughts to roam as he considered how he could find other helpers. Mr. Azik has entered a state of slumber. It's unknown when he will wake up. There's no way to wait for him. Well, a Septon is about to be born, but is only a baby. He is still at a nadir. And even if Ma'am Hermit has a way to temporarily restore his power while he is weak, it's impossible for him to do something as trivial as being my bodyguard. Besides, once he leaves Backlund or showcases his corresponding level, there's a very high chance that he might once again be locked on by Angel of Fate Ouroboros. Get the help of a demigod from the life school of thought through this snake of fate, such as that Counselor Ricardo? That will be difficult. The life school of thought is suffering an internal divide. The counselors have too many things to do. Besides, they're running all over the world with the die of probability to leave traces to divert the Angel of Fate's attention. Queen Mystic Bernadette? I'm not too familiar with her. Besides, the fool has demigods and angels under him. A blessed like Gehrman Sparrow can always find other help. Even if I claim that it's a cooperative effort, it will also expose quite significant problems. Sigh, on the surface, the fool has angels and demigods under him. But the actual situation is that at the angel and demigod side is the fool who's just photobombing them. The chief from the City of Silver? This is indeed something that could be used as a price when he makes a request, but the problem is that he's unable to leave the forsaken land of the gods. I think I should leave this opportunity for the Bizarro Bane. Those geezers of the Sanguine? There's no suitable reason, and it's very easy for me to be exposed to Lilith. Who knows who that dead ancient goddess who hasn't truly perished is? If she is actually the primordial moon in disguise, I can forget about resurrection. Klein thought of one candidate after another, but one by one, he struck them off the list. Finally, he couldn't help but sigh. When in need, Friends are always in short supply. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any hope today. As Klein reeled in poignancy, he took out paper and a fountain pen. Placing the paper on Enzo's back, he scribbled, "It's been a while since we last met. I wonder how you've been recently." As he wrote, Klein suddenly stopped. He felt the opening was too off and hypocritical. Miss Sharon is a person who restrains herself. When she writes letters, she goes straight to the point without saying anything unnecessary. I have to consider her personality and be more frank. Klein thought for a few seconds before raising the previous slip of paper. Shaking it, he made it become engulfed in scarlet flames. After a few seconds of deliberation, Klein wrote on a new slip of paper, "I've already acquired the spirit world coordinates of Calderon City. If you've already become a demigod, I wish to cooperate again to receive some help. If not, there's no need to force it. I can still find other friends. Sherlock Moriarty." After folding the slip of paper and addressing it to Ma'am Merriam, Klein took out the adventurer's harmonica again and blew it. Rionette Tinker, in her dark and complicated dress, walked out of the void as though she had never left the vicinity, appearing right in front of him. Klein handed her the folded slip of paper and a gold coin before seriously exhorting her. "Send it to Backlund, Hillston, 126, Guard Street. Throw it directly into the mailbox." "All right," one of Rionette Tinker's head said while another head but on the letter and gold coin. Upon seeing this, Klein pressed, somewhat worried, "You haven't lost the previous map, right? Do you know which borough Hillston Borough is? Do you know where Guard Street is?" The three other heads which Rionette Tinker held replied, "No, I know. It's very easy to find." Klein immediately heaved a sigh of relief as he politely sent off Miss Messenger. He temporarily threw the matter of Calderon City to the back of his mind and began disguising his marionette, Ludwell. The next morning, a man with brownish skin, light curly hair, and was dressed in a formal loan attire and a silk half-top hat, entered Tnick City that bordered a forest with his two servants. This was a city that mainly produced timber, rubber, and special products from the forest. There was talk in the town that a few hair-growth research centers and the complementing factories were established here. Having disguised himself as a local, wealthy man, Klein quickly found a hotel to stay in. Sitting on a reclining chair made of wrought tan, he observed his handiwork once again. Winner Enzo's skin was not only bronze, but it was now almost completely black. Together with his thin and soft hair, bushy brows and dark shadowy facial outline, matched with Ballum-styled baggy, creased pants and a black and white top, he looked like a typical example of a local servant that hailed from a particular plantation manor. Admiral Hell Ludwell's rather resplendent clothes had become the same style as Enzo's. His exposed skin had clear burn marks, and his silver mask was now dyed with a uniform iron-black color. This made it look as though he had been disfigured due to a fire accident, and that he was wearing a mask to hide his face, lest he scared any passers-by. After having his lunch, which was served to his room, Klein heard stacked illusory prayers. "Mail. Mr. Hanged Man? It's also possible it's Emlyn and Little Sunday. The transaction of the sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic of the vampire pathway is about to begin." Klein was just about to head for the bathroom to take 4 steps counterclockwise and head above the gray fog when his spiritual perception was triggered. He hurried activated his spirit vision and saw the headless Rionette Tinker appear out of the spirit world, which overlapped with the real world with a letter in a head's mouth. "Miss Sharon has replied?" Klein first thanked her before receiving the letter and tearing it open to read. "Sorry, I will likely still need another 1 to 2 months of preparation. If you still need my help by then, I'll be fine with it. Sharon." 1 to 2 months. It's not like I can't wait. It's not like I've digested my marionettist potion yet. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he got a pen and some paper to reply simply, "Take your own time. There's no rush. My matter isn't urgent. I can wait. Sherlock Moriarty." After handing the letter and gold coin to Rionette Tinker and getting her to send it to Backlund, Hillston Borough, 126, Guard Street, Klein suddenly thought of a problem. During wars, scouting is necessary. How can I be rash and so careless about exploring a dangerous place like Calderon City? When Miss Sharon advances, I can head there to do some scouting and gather some intelligence without the need to take risks. For example, I can figure out exactly what restrictions there are, what kind of anomalies will happen towards death domain powers, or I can figure out whether I'm only able to enter by a fixed entrance, or if I have any way of directly returning above the gray fog from inside. After confirming all of this, I can formulate a plan and make preparations. Of course, before scouting, divination is necessary. Klein soon made up his mind and walked into the attached bathroom. Chapter 9:25 Choosing Clothes. Above the endless grayish-white fog, in the magnificent ancient hall, Klein didn't rush to do a divination. He first answered the hanged man Alger's sacrificial ritual, and got the cane made from the ocean songster Beyonder characteristics to appear in front of him. Word of the Sea. This name, when transliterated to Chinese, does bring back memories. I'll just leave it at that. It's basically a weaker version of Sea God Scepter. It doesn't have demigod-level powers like lightning storm or tsunami either. There are quite a number of negative effects. As Klein recalled the hanged man's descriptions, he stroked the silver-inlaid black cane. Perhaps the mysterious space above the gray fog had naturally suppressed it, causing this Beyonder cane to not express its living characteristic. It silently lay there like it was the most common and ordinary piece of wood. Klein nodded slightly and muttered silently to himself. Mystical items with living characteristics are really rather troublesome. But from a different angle, it means that they can be communicated with. The die of probability back then was quite a nasty fellow, but didn't it also become obedient after getting schooled? Besides, I can always have my servants hold it most of the time. Yes, Winner Enzo will be most suitable. Although he already has 0 passive luck, he is still accumulating luck constantly to make preparations for that critical moment. Releasing a little bit of it wouldn't affect anything. This way, be it being tripped, thrown, or beaten, he would be able to smoothly avoid it and not garner the attention of others. On careful thought, the cane's pranks aren't completely useless. If I were to meet other marionettists, spirit world plunderers, or Bizarrobanes and lose my initiative, and end up being initially controlled, my thoughts and actions would turn sluggish. It would be quite difficult to extricate myself from that state by myself. At this moment, if an uncontrollable cane were to suddenly hit me or trip me to the ground, wouldn't I be successfully escaping from my predicament? If a mystical item's negative effects are used well, they can be quite a boon. Of course, in normal combat, such pranks can bring about unnecessary dangers. How it should be balanced or avoided will need repeated trial and error. As for the negative effects of easily being struck by lightning on a stormy day, Klein didn't mind. Firstly, unless he was in a special region, stormy weather wasn't common to begin with. It wasn't something that needed to be taken into consideration most of the time. Secondly, as a seer, divining the day's weather before heading out was a common act. Finally, if he couldn't avoid sudden flash storms, Klein could always give the cane to Enzo. This way, even if the lightning were to strike the winner, it would even up being attracted by a nearby lightning rod. Let's just hope I'm not that lightning rod. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he considered the most worrisome negative effect. It would belt out Beyonder singing every 6 hours. This was indiscriminate, and it was basically a huge one attack. After some thought, Klein decided to communicate with the word of sea cane to reduce the frequency at which it sang, or to give prior warning before it sang. I had breakfast early today. It's almost time for creeping hunger to start its howling. In thought, Klein removed the human-skinned glove from his left palm and threw it at an empty spot in front of the junk pile. Right on the heels of that, he lifted the silver-inlaid black cane and threw it over. Then he stirred some of the power of the mysterious space above the gray fog, creating a barrier that isolated all sound and images. He made creeping hunger and word of the sea spend time alone. After doing all of this, Klein rubbed his palms and conjured a pen and paper. He wrote down a divination statement. My scouting of Calderon City's periphery today is dangerous. After putting down the dark red fountain pen, Klein removed the spirit pendulum from his left wrist. He let the topaz hang down over the paper in close proximity with it. After chanting 7 times in his mind, he opened his eyes and saw the topaz standing still, And not spinning this meant that the divination had failed. Calderon City's actual situation is a secret to the entire spirit world, and divination lacks a starting point. Besides, that was once a divine kingdom of an ancient goddess. There's a mutated resurrection setup left over there. It can similarly interfere with divination. Klein rolled up his spirit pendulum and deliberated in thought. I can only trust what Red Light said. The danger around Calderon City's periphery isn't that great. Besides, I still have marionettes. I can let them go first and confirm if that place screens the gray fog. If it can, I'll give up. If it doesn't, I'll enter myself. Klein quickly came to a decision. Without any hesitation, he waved his hand to remove the barrier he had previously created. Then he saw the creeping hunger which had retreated to the side of the junk pile. It was propping itself up with 3 fingers while its thumb and pinky were pressing backward on Grozel's travels. It looked weak and could hardly stand. At the same time, there was a mouth in the middle of the palm. It revealed 2 illusory, white, and eerie teeth that kept gasping for air. On the other side of the barrier, the silver-inlaid black cane was on the ground. It twitched from time to time as its tip kept oozing with blue transparent water bubbles. Very good, silence at last. Upon seeing this scene, Klein muttered in gratification. Just as he said that, the word of the sea suddenly stood up. And as though it was being held, it hopped towards Klein, circling about the fool's seat and dodged elsewhere. Creeping hunger used all its 5 fingers as legs as it chased after the cane with great difficulty. Midway, it collapsed to the ground. Klein watched speechless before letting out a sigh. After fusing with Mr. A, creeping hunger seems to have a living characteristic, but this level of intelligence is way too low. It clearly grazed a wind-blessed and is capable of short-distance flight. Yet it still uses its fingers as legs to chase. After saying that, he turned his head towards the word of the sea cane which was hiding beside him. Aren't you a sequence 5 of the sailor pathway? What kind of mystical item are you if you can only hop on 1 leg? Seriously, are such low-level living characteristics equivalent to babies? No, a particular baby is way smarter than all of you. Klein reprimanded each of them and sighed as he said in amusement, "It's not like I'm a devil." Just as he said that, the glove and cane who were still stirring froze at the same moment. They didn't dare make a sound. Klein's subsequent words were left in his throat. All he could do was reach out to pick up word of the sea and kindly and sincerely speak to it. After a friendly and frank negotiation, this silver-inlaid black cane used high-frequency swaying to gesture that it would reduce its singing to a minimum. If it really couldn't hold back, it would inform its owner. The exact manner included, but was not limited to trembling slightly or automatically moving up a few centimeters. At the same time, it raised a request via singing. Never use the hand wearing creeping hunger to hold it. Of course, if its master insisted on doing so, it didn't object to it and was happy to accept it. Better than creeping hunger. It's not too stubborn. Klein beckoned for creeping hunger and wore it on his left palm. Taking a glance at the door of summoning which had been produced from the ritual, Klein began considering the items to bring on his scouting of Calderon City. Needless to say, the 2 marionettes were going. They could be used as bait, to scout the path ahead, be used as test subjects, and verify any traps. They allowed a marionettist to not need to undergo too many dangerous actions, so they were definitely going. They would be wearing Enzo's Flower of Blood ring and Ludwell's Harris sword. They were all standard equipment. In addition, Klein decided to get Enzo to carry the word of the sea. As for himself, Klein planned on heading there as a spirit body. Once anything was amiss, he would immediately end the summoning and return above the gray fog. This way, what clothes he matched was something worth considering. Azek's copper whistle? No, that is related to death, and Calderon City belongs to ancient death. There's a small possibility that this might create a terrifying anomaly, causing the danger in the core region to automatically come out. Black Emperor card or the Tyrant card? I'll be moving about the spirit world. The 2 marionettes are basically dead. I'm not afraid that they have their blood extracted. Haha, Ludwell is a half-human, half-dead entity. He doesn't have blood to speak of. The value of Enzo's blood only makes him appear human most of the time. And this could be recovered via using Flower of Blood. It also means that I can bring the Sea God Scepter to Calderon City. It's a place that's deep in the spirit world. It's far from the Rorstad archipelago, so I don't have to worry about being affected by the believer's prayers. The only problem is that I'll become irascible and short-tempered. It will be easy for me to become hot-headed. This is taboo when it comes to exploring. However, this is easily resolved. I'll leave it with Enzo or Ludwell. Besides, the Tyrant card's level is very high. It can produce a suppression effect to a certain degree on the Sea God Scepter, preventing me from easily flaring up. With the combination of the Tyrant card and the Sea God Scepter, I'm equivalent to half a sequence 4. This can then most effectively reduce the risk I face. In the future, even if I were to enter with Miss Sharon, I can also equip myself in such a manner. I'll get her to maintain her state as a wraith. No, an evil spirit state to circumvent all problems. I don't have to worry about the law of convergence. If Calderon City can screen the gray fog, I'll return after taking a look from the outside. No one will lock onto me or pursue me. After all, the spirit world isn't the home ground of the Sailor Pathway. If Calderon City can't screen the gray fog, and a high-sequence Beyonder of the Church of Storms really does get drawn there, I can end up using him. Amidst his thoughts, Klein suddenly reached out his hand, attracting the Tyrant card to fall into his palm. Immediately after that, he fused the card of blasphemy into his soul body. Suddenly, extreme might and terrifying auras emanated from the fool's location. A heavy papal tiara silently appeared on Klein's head as his clothes turned into a religious robe. The latter was similar in dressing as a pope from Saint Seiya, Knights of the Zodiac, which he had seen in his previous life. However, the colors were dark blue that was almost black. As howling winds sounded, the pontiff robe flared up suddenly as Klein raised his right hand and suspended himself in midair before catching the white bone scepter that flew towards him. At the tip of the scepter, the gems emitted either blinding silver or blue light like bolts of lightning that circled around the tyrant. With a thud, the Word of the Sea came prostrated to the ground, right beside Klein, who was wielding the scepter and dressed like a pontiff. One area of effect. Chapter 926 Spiraling City. I really do feel a little irascible, but I'm not that quick-tempered. Wearing the papal tiara and dark blue robes while wielding the Sea God Scepter, Klein seriously observed his new state. This meant that the Tyrant card could suppress the negative effects of the Sea God Scepter to a certain extent, but it wasn't able to completely eliminate it. Using cogitation, Klein composed himself and turned to look at the junk pile in the corner. Grozel's Travels? This is my strongest defensive item to this day. Besides, it also has some magical uses. But the problem is that it was made by another ancient god, Dragon of Imagination Anquelt. Based on what Little Sun said, this Dragon King was once allies with the owner of Calderon City Ancient Death, Phoenix ancestor Gregrace. Who knows if this book would trigger any unnecessary developments? To be safe, it's best if I don't bring it. And just like Azek's copper whistle, the mutated paper figurine can't be included. It has the remnant aura of artificial death. This might have a shock and awe effect when exploring Calderon City, but it also contains plenty of latent risks. The Priest of Light Beyonder characteristic? This can effectively restrain dead spirits, a natural nemesis for the City of the Dead, but it's only an ingredient that hasn't been made into a mystical item. The effects it has is rather limited. The negative effects are extremely bad. It won't be helpful to my soul state. In addition, lightning can also purify the dead. With the Sea God Scepter and Word of the Sea, there's no need for me to bring the Priest of Light Beyonder characteristic. Thoughts flashed across Klein's mind as he eliminated the remaining items in the junk pile. He wore the human-skinned glove on his left hand, wielded Sea God Scepter, and raised his right hand slightly. He made Word of the Sea fly up and land in his palm. Following that, the papal dress Klein changed the appearance of his soul. He hid his facial features within the shadows of the papal tiara. He slowly stood up as the dark blue robes fluttered in the wind, the white bone scepter dazzling. With just one step, Tyrant Klein passed through the door of summoning and walked out of the candlelight, arriving in the real world. He found himself in the rather spacious bathroom. After adding the Fate Siphon charm and Death Knell into his body, He opened the door and returned to the living room. He got Enzo to come over to receive word of the sea. After some thought, Klein took out Death Knell and handed it to Admiral Hal Ludwell. After doing all of this, he brought his 2 marionettes and relied on traveling to head for the coordinates in the spirit world that were provided by Miss Magician. The trip happened rather smoothly. The tyrant aura made all kinds of strange spirit world creatures not dare to approach him while en route. They didn't even dare look at him directly. Before long, Klein arrived at his destination. The scene in front of him looked no different from anywhere else in the spirit world. The saturated colors were overlapped, and there was some thin fog emanating everywhere. Elsewhere in the depths, pairs of eyes moved away one after another. The papal robe's cape fluttered gently in the wind as Klein did a rough scan before getting Enzo and Ludwell to enter a blob of fog that appeared very thin and normal. Suddenly, his field of vision widened with the help of his 2 marionettes. A grand city that was of legendary proportions appeared in his eyes. This city was abnormal. It didn't develop in a vertical manner, but instead spiraled deep into the ground. It gave one the feeling of an inverted mausoleum. Its buildings had a myriad of styles, but they were equally strange. Some of them had towering pale white rock columns with a huge single house carved out at the top. Some were long and squarish, with the doors placed at the ceiling with no windows in sight. Some were built in the ground, a tombstone erected at their entrances. Some were built with white bones, messy and scattered. The closer it was to the bottom of the pit, the more completely preserved the buildings were. The closer they were to the top, the more collapsed areas there were, ones filled with the dilapidation and rot that time brought. Klein made his 2 marionettes stop. Despite standing at the edge of the city and overlooking everything, he was unable to identify what was at the bottom of the building. Deep darkness enveloped the area as though no light had been shown inside for thousands and thousands of years. After a brief observation, Enzo lowered his head and chanted using ancient Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Just as he finished the statement, Klein, who was still situated outside Calderon City, heard stacked illusory pleas. He also recognized it to be from a man with a deliberately hoarse voice. It's the marionette's prayer from before. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he silently muttered. This means that Calderon City doesn't screen out the gray fog. At the very least, the outer periphery doesn't. I can enter. Although he said that to himself, he was in no way in a hurry. He subsequently controlled Ludwell to raise his left palm and spread it open. Illusory light was suddenly emitted. Following that, with a point as its origin, the area imploded, forming a pair of double bronze doors. This door was slightly blurry and extremely incorporeal. The surface was covered with countless mysterious patterns that gave one the feeling of indescribable heaviness and silence. With a creak, the mysterious bronze door shifted backward and cracked open a little. Through this crack, Klein saw the deepest and heaviest darkness. Amidst the darkness, pale white colors stirred, swirling up at times and descending at other times. It was like a river that was gushing through a night devoid of light. On its 2 sides, pale white stone columns appeared, looking extremely identical to Calderon City's interior, but in a more exaggerated manner. At this moment, pairs of transparent eyes and indescribable faces suddenly appeared. They filled the illusory bronze door's crack. Eagerly trying to pass through, Klein's eyes felt a slight stabbing pain as he immediately made Ludwell clench his left palm. Thud. The illusory door covered in mysterious patterns was pushed by an invisible force as it closed, disappearing from Enzo's sight. This mysterious door that separates life from death and leads to the underworld has apparently changed its course. It's no longer the underworld behind the door, but the core region of Calderon City. The deepest point at the bottom of the pit? Wearing the papal tiara while wielding the sea god scepter, Klein nodded in thought. This way, many of the powers of the death domain was remade in Calderon City, causing an anomaly. With this knowledge in mind, Klein once again got Ludwell to raise his left arm. The left part of this marionette's body rapidly turned illusory as dark green specks appeared as though he had turned into a wraith or specter. His arm began to stop abiding by the laws of reality as it suddenly extended into the distance. The center of its palm was abnormally white with an illusory face protruding from it. The face had its mouth half open as its tongue was sharp like a snake's. It was covered in white fur. In a completely surreal manner, the tongue flicked out far into the distance. It was as though it could drill directly into a human's body and absorb one's soul. Indeed, the death envoy powers Ludwell gets from the underworld creature inside his body has mutated. Not only has it been enhanced, but it has also gone from remotely extracting spirit bodies to directly consuming them. Klein stood at Calderon City's entrance and made Admiral Hell display all kinds of beyonder powers of the death domain. Through that, he gleaned the differences that there were from the usual outcome. The thing they had in common was that all of them had become more powerful. Then, Klein experimented by making Enzo use the specialness of his body and the various powers from Flower of Blood and Word of the Sea, before coming up with a conclusion. Aspects in the fate domain aren't affected. Lightning strike is suppressed, making it much weaker. Unable to fly too high. Powers like wind blades, singing, illusory scales, balance, and water membrane undergo no changes. With the end of these experiments, Klein made Enzo and Ludwell walk down the pale white stairs, clinging closely to the periphery of Calderon City. The buildings there had already completely collapsed. As the 200-meter threshold approached, Klein raised his right hand and pressed down on his face that hid in the shadows of the papal tiara. Then, wielding the sea god scepter, he stepped into the thin fog. His mind instantly felt a little groggy as the scene before him changed. He had already entered the city of the dead, Calderon City. Enduring the irascible feelings within him, Klein made his left glove turn dark. His body turned illusory as it was tainted by a dark color, turning him into a shadow. Only the sea god scepter in his hand continued emitting silver or blue beams of light. Using the soul's screening and the tyrant card suppression to hide the light, Klein floated diagonally ahead, slinking into the shadows of the collapsed buildings. He followed closely behind the two marionettes, beginning to perform an initial inspection of Calderon City's outer region. As he traversed the area, Klein gradually noticed something amiss. It was too quiet. It was so quiet that it was as though the entire city was dead. Even bugs had failed to survive. Based on what Erodes and Red Light Ire Moria had said, Phoenix ancestor Gregrace had uprooted Calderon City and thrown it deep into the spirit world. Before doing so, the residents inside the city were allowed to leave. Occasionally, there would be other spirit world creatures entering. But now, not only were there no active creatures in the peripheral region, there weren't even skeletons, zombies, or even one or two non-bone-like buildings. Klein tensed up more and more. With Enzo's and Ludwell's vision, he carefully observed his surroundings. During this process, his gaze swept across a broken pale white column. The ancient but damaged building at the top had a disc burnished from gold inside. The disc's smooth surface reflected a figure, but it wasn't Enzo, but Klein in his papal tiara and dark blue robe. This Klein had a gloomy demeanor. His face was pale and his eyes were listless as though he had long been dead. Chapter 9 27 Tyrants Might Hiding in the Shadows. Klein's heart tightened. He then quickly calmed down without showing any signs of horror. This was because he was extremely certain that the reflection on the golden disk's smooth surface wasn't him. At least, it wasn't the real him. If it really was him, Enzo would have seen the gray fog, seeing magical scenes that resembled a mythical creature form. This would have caused Klein to faint immediately. Since I'm completely fine, it means that the reflection isn't of me. Klein activated his spirit body thread's vision, controlled Enzo, and raised Word of the Sea. He approached the pale white collapsed column and the ancient building which remained in shambles while secretly releasing some of his luck. The swarthy marionette approached the golden disc one step at a time. Bending his back and raising the cane, he carefully observed the area. The disc had two layers, an inner and outer layer. The core region was as smooth as a mirror with very few patterns. The boundaries were engraved with bird-like creatures. Its entirety had an ancient magnificence to it. The figure it reflected remained the same. Despite reflecting Enzo, it reflected the gloomy, pale Klein with listless eyes. Even the sea god scepter, the papal tiara and papal robe that came with the tyrant card weren't missing. If it wasn't because of the lack of the gray fog, Klein definitely would have imagined that the disc could influence himself through a marionette and spirit body threads. Or perhaps it would be like what the Saint of Darkness back at the ruins of the Battle of Gods had encountered, having himself dissociate without realizing it. What does this actually mean? Klein calmly grew out of the shadows, restoring his appearance back when he first stepped into Calderon City. Then, using his Beyonder powers as a clown, he produced his present state in his mind. Holding the white bone scepter with embedded blue gems, he wore a caped papal robe with a papal tiara with different gems dotting it. His face was hidden in the shadows, appearing somewhat blurry. His entire body exhibited a gloomy and cadaveric air, as though he was a zombie that was recently dug out. Klein was alarmed. He never expected to really experience such changes. Apart from the gray fogs mixing with reality, the reflection on the golden disc really was him. Something that it doesn't involve the gray fog. It isn't anything to worry too much about. He hurriedly consoled himself as he calmed his mental state. Normally, with Klein's rich experience and good ability to adapt, there was nothing he needed to do at the moment. But first, considering how he was holding the sea god scepter that easily made him rash, he needed to pay constant attention. Second, he knew that this was once Phoenix ancestor Grigrace's divine kingdom, which contained the setup required for her revival. There was bound to be all kinds of abnormalities. Therefore, he was more nervous than ever before. Getting Ludwell to return, he used his Beyonder powers to do a thorough inspection of himself before gaining a preliminary understanding. When living creatures enter Calderon City, they will naturally transform into the deceased. This is similar to the underworld, but there's a fundamental difference. Here, living creatures won't die an abrupt death before slowly turning into mindless undead creatures. Instead, they will directly turn into dead spirits. I didn't notice it before because Enzo and Ludwell are essentially dead, so there's no need for them to be converted. Rhodes and Red Light Ire Moria didn't mention this because the travelers, spirit world creatures, and angels automatically recovered after leaving alive? This kind of transformation is unable to affect the powers of the gray fog that fuses with reality. And the disc reflects the dead me, not all of me, or the me that has had some interaction with Calderon. Klein was more inclined to believe in the latter, but he wasn't too sure. At this moment, he heard a sound coming from nearby. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was heavy but crisp, as though someone was striking metal heavily. Klein wasn't in a hurry to react. He carefully listened for 2 seconds before letting Enzo put down the heavy golden disc and walk towards a nearby broken tombstone. The halved tombstone corresponded to a building that developed further underground. On top of it were the words written with the language of the dead. A quick-tempered fellow, one who died as a result of comparing which was harder, his head or someone else's hammer. Enzo circled around the damaged tombstone and arrived at the entrance to the tomb. He reached out his left hand and turned the knob, pulling open the door. Amidst the rough grinding sounds of rust, the heavy door slowly opened. So. Pale white beams of arrow-like light flew out. They brushed past Enzo's face, the top of his head, torso, and inner thighs and flew into the distance, stabbing into the ground before vanishing. However, Winner Enzo was completely unharmed. I have to say that such a marionette is excellent for dangerous explorations. Klein sighed inwardly as he made Enzo cast his gaze down the building. It was a blacksmith, a giant with bluish-black skin and a head that looked like a ruptured watermelon held onto a hammer as he kept striking an anvil, but there was nothing on it. As the giant with the cracked head had normal spirit body threads and wasn't the sole avatar of someone else, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to get Enzo to take a more thorough look, his body suddenly turned numb as his thoughts turned sluggish. This feeling was something he had felt before. Back in Tingen, he had been in a similar state when he was under sealed artifact 2-049's influence. Klein didn't know better back then, but after becoming a marionettist, he knew that this meant that his spirit body threads had been controlled by the sealed artifact. This also meant that someone was controlling his spirit body threads. Furthermore, the difference from before was that, not only were his joints rusting, as though someone had infused glue into them, he also felt a strong numbness as if he had been struck by lightning. It made his actions become harder. No good. It's the spirit world plunderer. I was guarded against its use of soul avatar. It distracted me and secretly approached, but I never expected that it not only had a soul avatar, but it also has a partner. That giant blacksmith made me careless, and the marionette's existence made me ignore my own safety. Various thoughts emerged in Klein's mind involuntarily as it disrupted his normal thoughts of trying to save himself. At this moment, the giant blacksmith with a ruptured head raised his hammer and rushed over to Enzo, hoping to smash him into a pulp. And by Klein's neck, there was a cold wind blowing at it, pricking his hair up one by one. The surroundings were abnormally silent before, but now, all kinds of strange creatures emerged from the pale white stone column, run-down houses, and the tombstone's tomb. Some of them only had half a body. Others were transparent and nearly invisible. Some were stretched and soft like noodles. Some had a ruptured chest with bloody innards. Some had dark green faces that resembled that of an evil spirit. Others had eyes growing everywhere around their body. There were also others who looked like jellyfish that lived in the air. Countless gazes were cast onto Klein from different areas. They were without any feelings, just indifferent. At this moment, Klein opened his mouth with great difficulty as he said a word slowly. Sing. Just as he said that, the glove on his left palm opened its mouth, revealing its white teeth. Praise you, the Lord that created everything. The Lord who reigns behind the curtain of shadows. The degenerated nature of all living things. Amidst this jarring voice that resembled blackboard scratching sounds, Enzo, who had been thrown to the ground, successfully avoided the hammer's strike as Word of the Sea began spewing out water bubbles in excitement. Break. 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 Klein suddenly felt his head ache as his ability to think was instantly recovered, no longer having disconnected thoughts for a brief moment. However, his body remained rusted, as his body was filled with numbness. Following that, he relied on his spirituality while motionless, controlling Ludwell, who had returned to his side, to punch him with his left fist. Bang! Klein staggered back, instantly extricating himself from the numb and sluggish state. Then, wearing the papal tiara, he became hot-headed as he spread his papal cape and raised sea god scepter. The blue gems lit up one after another as a bright silver bolt of lightning blasted down. The bolt of lightning spread into branches, blanketing Calderon City's periphery for hundreds of meters with a lightning forest. The destructive aura and sense of destruction were brought to the forefront. The strange creatures that had charged out from various spots shattered, evaporated, and completely vanished as a result of the swath of silver. Moments after the silver storm quelled, Tyrant Klein's sea god scepter emitted a blinding light once again. The rapturous bolts of lightning snaked, embroiled the area, smiting down again and again like a huge wave. After 2 repeated casts of lightning storm, Klein was exhausted as he found his calm again. His heart beat suddenly as he recalled something. Lightning storm was indiscriminate when it struck. Apart from the sea god scepter wielding him and the partner who stood beside him, everything else suffered a decimating blast. This also meant that Ludwell was still fine, but there was a high chance of Enzo being wiped out. Klein instinctively looked over, and saw Enzo curled by the side of the halved tombstone. Behind him was the huge metallic hammer which still had tiny bolts of lightning snaking around. Not far from it was 2 non-human charred legs. The tomb corresponding to the tombstone had already collapsed. The iron black tiles that landed on the ground still had remnant silver bolts of lightning sizzling away. As expected of a winner, he didn't even die despite such an onslaught. The amount of luck he accumulated has probably been passively expended. Klein felt relieved as he activated his spirit body thread's vision to observe his surroundings. He was searching for the spirit world plunderer. He believed that the range of a spirit world plunderer's controlling of spirit body threads couldn't match that of a lightning storm. The already dilapidated buildings had nearly been leveled. The remaining stone pieces and bones were mostly charred black. Even the heavy golden disc was in shambles. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the rubble more than 100 meters away from Klein. It was wearing a translucent white robe. It didn't have a head or limbs. It appeared like it was being propped up by an invisible person. At that moment, it looked like it was in a sorry state, with wounds and black marks everywhere. This is the spirit world plunderer, I suppose. My rash usage of 2 lightning storms seems to have restrained it. Upon seeing this scene, Klein had such thoughts flash through his mind. Chapter 9:28 Misdirection. At his point, Klein had roughly understood the situation. Due to the law of beyonder characteristic convergence, he had been targeted by the spirit world plunderer the moment he entered Calderon City, which didn't even have ordinary dead spirits. It first moved the golden disk of unknown origins to the predicted path, allowing his marionette to see it while walking past. As such, his attention was transferred to the transformation effect Calderon City had on the living. Following that, it used the giant blacksmith, which wasn't its sole avatar, to distract him further. Finally, it secretly arrived within control distance and achieved success in one try. If it wasn't because I had seen those deceased bodies that are hung up like wind chimes at the cathedral, thus having an instinctual fear of high-sequence beyonders of the seer pathway, and having prepared several autonomous means to disrupt any exertion of control over me, I might have already been made a sole avatar by the spirit world plunderer. Seriously, I should have thought of the law of beyonder characteristic convergence before I came in. After carrying the Sea God Scepter, even with the Tyrant card suppressing it, I'm still a little too rash. I nearly missed out on such a crucial detail. On the surface, I did seem as cautious as I usually am, but in fact, I had turned rash without realizing it. Yet, I didn't even believe I was being rash. Klein's thoughts raced before he raised the bone scepter-wielding arm, and continued using Lightning Storm. If once wasn't enough, make it twice. If that still wasn't enough, do it a 3rd time. In short, he had to take this opportunity to prevent the spirit world plunderer from escaping from the range of his attacks. This was the safest method, and it was also Klein's fighting style that he looked up to the most. If it wasn't because Lightning Strike had been greatly weakened in Calderon City, he even suspected that he could have gone over to pick up the beyonder characteristic already, and having already digested most of the Sequence 5 potion, his spirituality was sufficient enough for him to deal out such damage for a while. At this moment, the invisible figure wearing a translucent white robe burst into pale white flames. It appeared in midair several hundred meters away. The spirit world plunderer had used Flaming Jump, which was many times stronger than Klein's version, instantly pulling away from him. At the same time, in the rubble it was hiding in, a 4-meter-tall bluish-black giant staggered to his feet. The giant's chest was open, but there weren't any innards. However, it stood like a castle, standing in between the tyrant and the spirit world plunderer, blocking Klein's line of sight. And in Klein's eyes, its spirit body threads were gathered together, extending far towards the spirit world plunderer. It was obvious that it was a soul avatar. At the tip of the Sea God Scepter, the blue-colored gems lit up. A few bolts of lightning leapt out of thin air, mixing together into a huge silver arrow. Instantly, it smote the bluish-black giant's head. All the invisible defenses shattered, and like papier-mâché, the giant's head cracked. Countless bits of charred flesh splattered as his headless body evaporated amidst white gases that were tainted with dark green spots. All his vitality was robbed away. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Klein, in his papal tiara and papal robe, raised the bone scepter even higher. The blue light radiated in ripples as howling wind blew up his cape. In a very large area of Calderon City's periphery, dark clouds quickly gathered. Under a suppressive layer, they made the area appear darker and more repressed. Smack, smack, smack. Bean-sized drops of water smashed to the ground, releasing dust that had accumulated over time. Splash. The raindrops pattered at an increasing pace, forming a catastrophic storm. The water extinguished the pale white flames and formed a stream that gushed downwards towards the lowest point of the city, right for the end of the deep pit. In such weather, Klein's flaming jump had been made ineffective, but it was likewise for the spirit world plunderer. However, to a tyrant, his spirituality could spread through the dark clouds as though he had transformed into a deity that overlooked the land. Every dark cloud, every drop of water had become Klein's eyes. They allowed him to easily find the spirit world plunderer in every area that had its weather change. This invisible figure with the translucent white robe was hiding behind a broken pale white column. It hadn't left the periphery for the core region. Boom. A deafening boom sounded as bolts of lightning meshed to form a silver beam that shot out from the dark clouds, right at the spirit world plunderer. Relying on its potent spiritual premonition, the invisible figure burrowed into the ground half a second early. 3 thick silver beams smote the area one after another, melting the soil away as they sank downwards, producing charred craters. The spirit world plunderer emerged from another spot as it hurriedly dodged, keeping to the right at times and left at other times, as though it was carrying out a snaking dodge maneuver. However, regardless of where it fled to, the silver beams would chase up to it. They even blocked its path ahead of time, preventing it from attempting to leave the stormy region. Boom, boom, boom. The deity akin to a tyrant, who looked down from the dark clouds at the spirit world plunderer, waved his scepter and struck down again and again at his target, with success barely eluding him several times. Klein turned more and more anxious, eager to immediately end the hunt. Hence, he unreservedly triggered the sea god scepter to increase the frequency at which bolts of lightning struck down. Suddenly he felt a strong sense of exhaustion. This alarmed Klein, for he realized that something was amiss. The spirit world plunderer had the chance of retreating deeper into Calderon City at the beginning, so why is it staying around? It's clearly a spirit world creature without a physical body. It can burrow underground to avoid the lightning and a tyrant's notice, so why is it circling around from time to time? It's trying to make me attack. It has noticed that I'm not a demigod through my spirit body threads and my control over my marionettes. It wishes to drain me of my spirituality. Klein was alarmed. Combining it with his original encounter, he came to a realization of how intelligent the spirit world plunderer was. It was a rather crafty creature. At the same time, he also thought of a problem. Could lightning storm and the stormy rain attract the notice of dangerous existences in the core region of Calderon City? I'm too rash. I keep neglecting the critical details. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein put away the sea god scepter. The heavy storm stopped as the dark clouds quickly scattered, the weather restoring to normal. Klein made Enzo return to his side with word of the sea, and he got Ludwell to protect him in the middle. Following that, he and his 2 marionettes walked out as though they were trying to leave Calderon City, while he still had some spirituality left. During this process, Klein had his spirit body thread's vision constantly activated to prevent the spirit world plunderer from approaching him. He noticed that this creature's spirit body threads were somewhat special. A portion of them came out from its body and extended outwards normally. A number materialized externally and were bound together in a thick bundle, right into the translucent white robe. Klein suspected that this was the state when a spirit world plunderer controlled a soul avatar, making it different from a marionettist. As he shifted his gaze, he suddenly saw thin black illusory threads coming out from a collapsed house. A portion of them gathered into a thick bunch with its source in the distance. Klein didn't hesitate to raise his sea god scepter, creating a sonorous thunderclap. Boom. Amidst this sound that struck awe into one's mind and spirit, Ludwell suddenly raised his left hand. Half his body instantly turned illusory as his arm extended out extensively, heading straight for the collapsed house. Midway, his palm turned abnormally pale white. An illusory face protruded out and stuck out with a snake-like tongue which had white fur covering its surface. The tongue reached out far, penetrating the wall and stabbing at the spot where the spirit body threads were gathered. It immediately sucked on a distorted and blurry soul. Around the soul, a number of spirit body threads suddenly disappeared as though they never existed. A portion of them was none other than the gathered bundle, the ones that came from afar. They were fake. The spirit world plunderer was able to create fake, illusory spirit world plunderers, or instantly swap location between the soul avatar and itself. Klein suddenly turned his head and looked elsewhere. Indeed, he saw a blob of spirit body thread swim over from underground at a fast speed. He once again used Sea God Scepter, releasing a thunderclap close to the ground, one that could awe his spirit body. Meanwhile, Enzo expended some of his remaining luck, adding bad luck to the target. Then he shot out a silver bolt of lightning from the tip of the Word of the Sea. The bolt of lightning rather luckily passed through a crack and entered the ground, striking the assailant directly. It caused a portion of the spirit body threads to instantly vanish. It was also fake. Just as Klein reacted, his thoughts paused and his body turned numb. Just as he opened his mouth with great difficulty to instruct the mystical item, the invisible figure in the translucent robe descended from above, landing right before him. The spirit world plunderer had been hiding high in the sky, cloaking itself with the grayish-white clouds. The moment this invisible figure appeared, maggots began crawling out of its collar where its head should be. They were maggots with strange patterns covering them. Just one look at them sent his mind reeling. Although he broke out of the control of his spirit body threads, he also lost his ability to think. His face that was shadowed by the papal tiara began to grow meat tendrils. Each tendril was relatively transparent, like squirming worms. If it wasn't for the tyrant card's level supporting him, he would have fallen to the ground while struggling in pain. The spirit world plunderer had a mythical creature form to a certain extent. At this moment, the invisible figure inside the white robe began to control Klein's spirit body threads without any obstacles in the way. In a few seconds, it was already close to succeeding. Seeing that its prey was about to become its sole avatar, the spirit world plunderer suddenly saw its target open his mouth with great difficulty and say a word. He had recovered from the state of nearly losing control faster than it had anticipated. And the word was in ancient Hermes, fate. It was the incantation for the fate siphon charm. If Klein really wanted to leave, he would have grabbed his two marionettes and directly ended the summoning to return above the gray fog. He wouldn't have walked to Calderon City's entrance. He was planting a trap for the spirit world plunderer. The reason why he could recover so quickly from the injuries dealt to him by a mythical creature form, and why he was able to chant the relevant word, was because he had experienced such situations too many times. Besides, although he wasn't sure what method his opponent was using, there was definitely a rather well-rounded way to deal with it, make his target unlucky. Just as Klein entered a sluggish state, his first reaction wasn't to make the mystical item sing, but to let Enzo expend all his luck, making the spirit world plunderer have enough bad luck. Chapter 929 True Soul Body Fate. As the dragged-out and abstruse ancient Hermes term resounded, the spots where the spirit world plunderer and Klein stood suddenly darkened. It wasn't very obvious, as though a cloud had drifted over in midair without stopping. But when this illusionary shadow dissipated, the invisible figure that was donning a translucent white robe stood frozen on the spot. The surface of its clothes showed signs of worms crawling across it. It was sluggish, slow, and in a dire state. Across it, Klein's eyes had their lucidity return. The meat tendrils on the shadowed face beneath the papal tiara vanished. It appeared as though it wasn't the spirit world plunderer who had controlled Klein's spirit body threads and nearly succeeded. Instead, it appeared as though Klein was the one who was controlling it and had nearly converted it into his marionette. The fate siphon charm switched one's fate. This was a high-level charm made using a worm of time. It could siphon off the target's subsequent fate, and in a short period of time, burden it with that of the target's, so as to complete an exchanging of fates. Therefore Klein and the spirit world plunderer's situations had switched. One went from death to survival, while the other went from victory to instant despair. After confirming that the spirit world plunderer was intelligent and extremely difficult to deal with, making it difficult to hunt it, Klein began putting on an act of retreating. He appeared rash as he deliberately walked into the spirit world plunderer's control, enticing its actions, ready to use the fate siphon charm at the critical moment. That way, what terrible acts the spirit world plunderer did to its enemy, the charm would then allow it to experience the same despair. Of course, if the fate siphon charm didn't have the expected effect, or if the spirit world plunderer's main soul didn't appear, and had ended up using other means to control the situation, Klein still had his last trick up his sleeve to protect himself, directly end the summoning, and return above the gray fog. He would sacrifice his two marionettes and a few mystical items in order to ensure his own safety. Without the time to marvel at how magical the fate siphon charm was, or how terrifying angels from the Marauder pathway were, Klein didn't hesitate to raise the sea god's scepter high up before the swapping of fates ended. The dark blue papal robe flared up with the wind as the golden papal tiara emitted mesh blue and silver beams of light. At the tip of the white bone scepter, it shot out bolts of lightning that gathered into a ball before landing on the spirit world plunderer's body. A swath of silver color brightened up immediately, inundating the target, turning the surroundings white. Once, twice, thrice, Klein continuously triggered terrifying lightning balls, expending his spirituality without holding back. Finally, he heard a roar that seemed to stem from the depths of one's soul as he instinctively sensed that his target had collapsed and dissipated. Only then did Klein lower the sea god scepter and watch the silver lightning sizzle away. At that moment, his entire spirit body had turned rather illusory. Even with the tyrant's augmentation, it didn't seem real. As the lightning dispersed, the invisible figure in the white translucent robe appeared once again in Klein's sight. Flickering light emerged from within as the spirit world plunderer's body cracked, turning into countless illusory bubbles that disintegrated bit by bit. The tyrant had succeeded in the hunt. At this moment, deep within Calderon City, there was a sudden quake. It was as though a massive creature had awoken as a result of the spirit world plunderer's death, or that countless dangerous creatures were surging out. The indescribable feeling combined into a swath of illusory grayish-white, and like a tidal wave, rose up from the bottom. Other spirit world plunderers? No, it appears to be a more terrifying and horrible creature. A being that the spirit world plunderer attends to? Also in Calderon City's core region, at the end of the deep pit, it's still as silent as ever. There's no sound at all, making it more horrifying. Klein pumped himself up as he diverted some attention in order to monitor the situation inside Calderon City, as he anxiously waited for the spirit world plunderer's characteristic to appear to form an ingredient. He wasn't relishing in the delight of a successful hunt, but was pacing about anxiously at the edge of the abyss. During this process, Klein got Enzo and Ludwell to stay close to him. He threw the sea god's scepter to the former, so as to escape the state of irascibility. He began considering how to deal with the subsequent development with a clear mind, as well as consider whether he had missed out on some other details. As the thoughts flashed in his mind, Klein suddenly recalled something. Back when he made the mystical items sing, Creeping Hunger had praised the true creator and had used his complete honorific name. Although the human skin glove had used Hermes instead of ancient Hermes or other languages that could stir the powers of nature, the former was still usable when it came to sacrifices. This also meant that the true creator might have very well heard Creeping Hunger's praises and noticed the commotion here. Apart from the rising grayish-white tide and the terrifying creature deep down in the city, there are other dangers. Wait, I'm now a spirit body equivalent to a wraith. I'm not in my normal state. Just as Klein's mind thought of something, his spiritual perception was triggered as he instinctively cast his gaze at the entrance to Calderon City. The lights there flickered as a figure entered. The figure was wearing a simple and ordinary linen robe with a head of silver hair. He was a handsome man with soft facial features. His eyes were gentle with some hints of coldness. It was as though he was observing the fates of everyone in the world like a spectator. Behind him, there were beams forming illusory layers of pure wings. They spread outwards, blocking the entire entrance. Eli Klein nearly hissed through the gaps in his teeth as a series of titles and names flashed across his mind. Ouroboros, Tail Devourer, Angel of Fate, King of Angels. He didn't have the luxury of time to consider the possibility of his previous thought. His body expanded as though it was incorporeal, enveloping his marionettes, Enzo and Ludwell, the yet-to-appear characteristic, and the spirit world plunderer's remnant bubbles within. At this moment, Ouroboros' silver eyes already had the distant figure in his sights. It was a figure wearing a papal tiara and a dark blue robe, exuding extreme oppression and tyranny. There was a grayish-white fog that had been blurred by the tyrant's aura. A river of flickering light appeared in his eyes, seeming to circle the tyrant figure and the periphery of Calderon City. Silently, the square houses and the pale white columns stood up again despite being destroyed by the lightning storm from before. The charred legs of the giant blacksmith once again possessed a body as he appeared inside the tomb, striking at the anvil. All of this returned to what it was like shortly after the tyrant stepped in. However, Klein in his pontiff attire had vanished. His two marionettes along with the remnant bubbles of the spirit world plunderer had vanished as well. The corresponding figure was unable to return as the rebooted scene shattered, turning back to the desolate state after the battle. Tail devourer Ouroboros watched silently for a long while before making a move. The grayish-white swath that rose up from the depth of Calderon City slowly receded back down. Above the gray fog, Klein slumped in the high-back chair of the fool in exhaustion. He wasn't even able to get Enzo and Ludwell to massage him. He had already thrown the sea god scepter back to the junk pile. The tyrant card had left his soul body, and was placed facing down beside the Black Emperor card. The spirit world plunderer's bubbles were floating ahead, with the Beyonder characteristic constantly seeping out before combining with the points of light. After resting for a while, Klein saw grayish-white powder fall onto the mottled table's surface. Following that was a transparent item that seemed weightless. The item was the size of a palm, formed by coiled maggots. It was almost shaped like a human, and its interior was filled with a colorless liquid. Bubbles often emerged, scattering black hints of light. Klein didn't dare to look at it carefully, as there was a more complicated structure in the weightless transparent object. They formed indescribable patterns and symbols that seemed to fuse knowledge, power, transformation, secrets, bizarreness, and madness within, making them no longer abstract. This made Klein feel very dizzy. His mind was even on the verge of breaking down, with his soul almost losing control. This is likely the true soul of the spirit world plunderer. I have the corresponding powder as well. There's about 70 grams more than I needed. It's more than I expected. Klein nodded indiscernibly and stored the powder into a box. Together with the true soul body, he threw them on the junk pile and covered it with the gray fog. After completing this, he raised his hand to rub his temples and made a self-deprecating remark. If it wasn't for the sea god scepter, I probably would have had to leave Calderon City due to the assault of the spirit world plunderer. I would then wait until I had helpers and could make the most solid of hunting plans, so as to control the stirrings of the area to not alarm the unknown entity at the core region. Sigh, I was rash the entire time. Although the outcome was fine, it really doesn't suit my character. It's also completely at odds with the seer pathways acting. In the future, I should try to avoid using the sea god scepter in the outside world. The spirit world plunderer has been successfully hunted. There's no need for me to get Miss Sharon's help. In a few days, I'll write to her so that she won't be thinking over this matter. However, I have a premonition that I'll still be heading to Calderon City in the future. When that happens, perhaps I might still need Miss Sharon's help. In addition, I have to seek out information on Bizarro Baines. I can't put all my hope on the City of Silver. Amidst his thoughts, Klein directly returned to his body, without bringing his marionettes. He ended the ritual and headed straight for bed, falling asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. Escaped. Soas looked at the man opposite him and asked daily Simone, who was carrying out a spirit channeling. They had just finished their operation and had captured a few numinous episcopate members. However, the key personnel the intel pointed at, Hand of White Palenque to Siblius, wasn't at the secret gathering point. He was a Sequence 4 demigod. Therefore, not only had the Red Gloves team used a Grade 1 sealed artifact, they had even requested Goddesses Ailia's help. However, it was all futile. Daily Simone nodded. Yes. She then looked at the captive, suddenly speaking with an ethereal voice. Where did Palenque to Siblius go? He said he was going to meet someone. The numinous episcopate member answered slowly. Who is that person? Daily Simone pressed. Leonard Mitchell and company also cast their gazes over. The man who was being spirit channeled answered with an unperturbed voice. In Sanguil. Chapter 930 Former Organization in Sanguil. Upon hearing the name, all the Red Gloves present fell silent. Not a single one spoke for a moment. Ever since this former bishop betrayed and fled the Church of Evernight had never relaxed its pursuit of him. Archbishops and high-ranking deacons who took up high posts had taken turns being responsible for searching for him. They helped each other, often bringing the relevant sealed artifacts everywhere to search for clues about him. But ultimately, They were unable to lock onto Nsangwil. He slipped away as a result of all kinds of coincidences. His shadow wasn't even noticed. Furthermore, he had caused several major events that killed many Nighthawks. To the Church of Evernight, especially the Nighthawks, he was someone they hated that had also insulted them. Without realizing it, Leonard Mitchell had already clenched his hanging fists as his breathing grew deeper. He soon forced himself to extricate himself from the sudden emotions that emerged within him. He turned his attention to something else. It was no wonder Dwayne Dantes was able to meet Nsangwil on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea. It was because the latter's goal was also the southern continent, East Balam. Amidst everyone's silence, Daily Simone immediately used her spirit body to emit an ethereal voice without any obvious changes. With some coldness, she spoke at a quickened pace. "Where are they meeting?" The numinous episcopate member shook his head blankly. "I don't know." Daly raised a few more questions, but she didn't get an ideal reply. Finally, she took a step back and cast her eyes at the Red Gloves team captain, Soest. Soest sighed and deliberated over his words before saying, "First, we need to inform this piece of intel to Her Excellency, Goddess's Eye. We shall leave it to her to contact the Holy Cathedral. Ince, who has 0-08 with him, isn't someone a Red Gloves team can handle. Second, we should continue investigating and follow this clue pertaining to Palenque to Siblius. Let's hope that we can figure out Nsangwil's motives. With the situation of us not being able to track him or lock onto him, grasping his motives is more important than knowing where he is. Perhaps it can help us set up a trap that he has no choice but to step into. Finally, from now on, everyone is to take note of any coincidences. Regardless of the reason, they are to be reported to me." "Yes, Captain," the Red Glove members replied in unison. Leonard maintained his silence as he turned his head to glance at Daily Simone. He found that this gatekeeper who addressed herself as a spirit medium was similarly silent. Her gaze was dark. At the same time, he heard Pallas Zorost's slightly aged voice resound in his mind. "Haha, from the looks of it, I'll be witnessing a play of running and pursuing. What does old man mean? Is he hinting at something?" "We just decided to start investigations on Nsangwil's motives, and it's already known by 0-08? Leonard looked away and suddenly had an idea. If a person who is already dead was to secretly do the relevant investigation, would he be able to avoid 0-08's notice? After 2 hours of sleep, Klein rubbed his still throbbing head and slowly got out of bed. Following that, he pulled the bell by the side of the door and waited for an attendant to arrive. Before long, a native deliberately dressed in lone attire, a white shirt and red vest, knocked on the door. Klein twisted the handle and opened a tiny gap in the door. He instructed with a hoarse voice, "Send another lunch set to the room. I had my meal too early." At that instant, he already looked like the tanned Enzo. As a gentleman living in a luxurious room with 2 servants, it was impossible for him to personally instruct the attendant at the door. "Yes, sir, a lunch set. Any special requests?" The native attendant took out some paper and a pen and began recording as he asked with a rather strange Loanese accent. Klein used an equally odd Loanese accent. "With braised meat as the main dish, match it with a cup of sparkling wine with ice and lemon." "Do I include 2 servant meals?" the native attendant asked, following the usual procedure. Klein was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "Yes." After ending the conversation, he closed the door and quickly set up a ritual, bringing back Enzo and Ludwell from above the gray fog to the real world. As for Creeping Hunger and Word of the Sea, he temporarily left them in the junk pile. One of them was starving, and the other could hardly resist the urge to sing. After Klein controlled the marionettes to clean up his room, a few attendants came to deliver lunch. Soon, the entire room was filled with the sounds of cutlery hitting the plate and a soft chewing sound. After some time, Klein put down his cutlery, picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth. In satisfaction, he leaned backward and shook his head helplessly. "If this continues, I'll really become fat." The 2 marionettes had already lost the ability to eat. But to conceal that fact, Klein had no choice but to add servant meals. With him unwilling to see food go to waste, he could only try to eat as much as he could. "Thankfully, I'm a faceless." Klein covered his mouth as he burped before drinking the last bit of sparkling wine. Only at this moment did he feel like he had recovered. He now had the energy to consider the various details of his trip to Calderon City. The Marauder pathway is truly terrifying. Just a charm created from a worm of time is able to achieve such incredulous effects. As a king of angels, it's obvious how terrifying Blasphemer Amon is. Even an avatar isn't easy to deal with. Thankfully, I didn't put on a brave front. I knew to mimic those with experience, and directly fled to the southern continent. The true creator places a great importance on me. He directly got Tail Devourer Ouroboros to rush over. This does have a feeling of traveling across time. The angels on ancient murals are just walking out and standing before me. Thankfully, I was still able to directly end the summoning. Just as Klein thought of this, his expression sank as he discovered a serious problem. Ouroboros is a king of angels from the monster pathway. This also meant that he could directly see the uniqueness about him. He could see the grayish-white fog and see the illusory door formed of spherical lights and the transparent and translucent maggots that formed the spherical lights. What does this actually imply? The angel of fate who has survived since the second epoch should know something. And the true creator probably knows more. Could they be able to tell that I'm the master of the mysterious space above the gray fog? Regardless, the importance they place on me will rise. Klein clenched his right fist and put it to order or Rose Redemption might take. He felt lucky that, be it Rose Redemption or the Aurora Order, they had yet to lock onto any of the Fool's believers. However, during the chaotic battle outside Byam, when he was still active as Gehrman Sparrow, he had thrown out the Tinder Glove, which had been corrupted by the true creator, to attempt to attract a saint from the Aurora Order. This might very well have led to the crazy adventurer to enter the suspect list. From the clues extending outward from Gehrman Sparrow, there's Admiral of Stars, Vice Admiral Iceberg, Danitz and Anderson. All of them will be investigated by the Aurora Order. I have to warn them. Klein slowly exhaled and stood up, prepared to head above the gray fog. From his point of view, the pursuit of Gehrman Sparrow by the military, Church of Storms, Rose School of Thought, and Numinous Episcopate were all different. The true creator's believers were rather crazy and had a king of angels, a leader who was good at prying into the secrets of fate, active in the real world. This way, it didn't matter if Catlia and company were at sea, making it difficult to be locked on. There was still the risk of them being found. Among them, Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina and the Fog Sea's strongest hunter Anderson weren't people Klein was worried too much about. They knew little, nothing that pointed towards the core problem. Nothing much would happen aside from the need to consider whether the bunch of lunatics of the Aurora Order would employ extreme methods in the interrogation process. West Balam, Northern State. In the Kukua city ruled by May Sanchez. Danitz, who was chewing on roasted meat, paused suddenly. He heard Mr. Fool pass him the warning from Gehrman Sparrow. Be careful of the Numinous Episcopate. Be careful of the Aurora Order, especially the latter. Pay special attention. Also warn Anderson Hood as well as Edwina Edwards. Be careful of the Numinous Episcopate. Be careful of the Aurora Order. How many has it been? The military, Church of Storms, Church of Evernight, Rose School of Thought. What did Gehrman Sparrow do? Why has he offended so many factions? Dogs hit. Danitz's expression froze before grimacing. He had no idea that the strongest person of the 7 pirate admirals had changed. Opposite him, Anderson put down the knife he used to slice meat, pricked up his brows and curiously asked, "Have you recalled something?" Danitz secretly took a deep breath and asked after some deliberation, "Have you heard of the Aurora Order?" He wasn't sure if Anderson knew. After all, the Aurora Order was a rather secretive organization in the beginning. Its reputation was later built up in the Lone Kingdom. Anderson chuckled. "I'm actually more surprised that you know of them. Did your captain tell you?" Without waiting for Danitz to answer, he combed his short hair with his finger and continued. "They believe that the Creator is omnipresent. Everything has Godhood. They believe that life is nothing but a spiritual journey. As long as one is willing to listen to their preachings, understand, discover, and gather the Godhood, they will eventually become angels to transcend reality." Such an idea doesn't sound bad, But that's not the main point. The main point is that they believe in the true creator. Upon hearing that, Danitz couldn't help but jeer. You know quite a bit, just slightly less than I know. Anderson immediately curled the ends of his mouth and said with a beaming smile, Of course. I once joined an organization in Intis. They hoped to change society, the world, to make the supernatural no longer secret, and to be out in the open for everyone to see, so as to become true rulers. They're called the Iron and Blood Cross Order, and they also believe in the true creator. Danitz's expression froze as cold sweat oozed out of his forehead. Chapter 931 New Method to Acquiring Intel. Glancing at Danitz's expression, Anderson continued as though he didn't notice a thing. However, their brains appeared to have been eaten by zombies. They were fervent to the point of stupidity. They didn't adhere to my sense of aesthetics. So after cheating them of their things, I quit. Why's your face a little pale? You're even sweating. Did you get heat stroke? As a hunter, shouldn't adapting to the environment be an intrinsic ability? Danitz lifted his right hand and wiped his sweat. Cursing inwardly, he forced a smile and said, I've heard that once someone believes in an evil god, it's almost impossible to escape the faith. As he spoke, he raised his chin slightly, wearing a look as though he was musing over the circumstances of his future death. It didn't cross his mind that Gehrman Sparrow had just offended the Aurora Order, and was being targeted by the true creator's believers. He also didn't make the connection that he was believing in a suspected evil god, the fool. Well said. Anderson replied with a smile that didn't have the slightest hint of gloom. It's not like I have any true faith. Back then, the incantations I said were lines I modified from the god of knowledge and wisdom. Since they don't really enjoy using their brains, no, they don't even have that. As long as you superficially appear devout, any random excuse can be used to fool them. Without waiting for Danitz to develop the discussion further, he asked, Why are you suddenly asking about the Aurora Order? Danitz bit down on his roasted meat and slowly chewed and swallowed. After a deliberate pause of 20 to 30 seconds, he said, I just recalled something. For some reason, Gehrman Sparrow has been identified by the Aurora Order as a high-priority elimination target. Oh right, there's also the Numinous Episcopate. And both you and me are known to have relations with him. You want me to be careful against the Aurora Order and the Numinous Episcopate? Anderson nodded in enlightenment as he chuckled. You've recently mentioned something similar. Rose School of Thought, Church of Storms, Lone Military. Man, at times I even feel that Gehrman Sparrow is more suited to being a hunter than me. Danitz could hardly retort as he nodded heavily in agreement. Anderson thought for a moment when he suddenly changed topics out of the blue. What do you plan on doing here in West Balam? Helping Gehrman Sparrow with something? Upon hearing this question, Danitz fell silent for a second. He put down the item in his hand and tidied his clothes in an unhurried manner. Investigate the faith of the different classes of West Balam. This was determined after his discussion with Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina. In common parlance, it meant investigating the developments of the various secret organizations and factions in West Balam. Of course, this included some preliminary contact with the local ruling forces, and to figure out if they had any desire to purchase firearms. Investigate the faith of the different classes of West Balam. Anderson repeated Danitz's words as he reflectively raised his right hand to rub his temples as though he had a headache. After the end of the tarot gathering, and warning Admiral of Stars to take note of the Aurora Orders and Numinous Episcopate's investigations, with the best choice being seeking the Moses Ascetic Order's help, Klein busily finished the three-party transaction between the world, the moon and the sun. He received £5,000 in return. After dinner, he bit on an unlit disguised smoke pipe as he read the papers. Then, he saw Miss Messenger walk out of the void to deliver him a letter. Leonard's. Klein reached out to receive it and noticed that Rionette Tynker didn't stay at all. She had rapidly returned to the spirit world. This also made him determine that Leonard Mitchell had already paid the mailing fee. Hence, he took out his other hand and unfolded the letter. Insangwal has appeared in East Balam. He's suspected to have met with Palenque Tesiblius from the Numinous Episcopate's Artificial Death faction. Insangwil. Klein ruminated over the name as he slowly leaned back into his reclining chair. In the letter, Leonard wished that he could do some investigations in secret to figure out Insangwil's motives. But the problem is that 0-08 has the characteristic of any mention of it will be known. Knowing of it also means being known by it. Besides, it's good at arranging coincidences, making people follow its directions without even realizing it. Under such circumstances, it's very difficult to avoid 0-08's notice while investigating Insangwil. Not only is there no chance of success, it's also easy to expose myself. As Klein thought, he made Enzo walk behind him and begin massaging his shoulder. He read Leonard Mitchell's letter again, hoping to find more clues and incisive points for investigations from those few words. East Ballam. Numinous Episcopate. Artificial death. Palenque to Siblius. Why is Insangwil looking for them for? Trying to find allies for the true mastermind behind the great smog of Backlund. That royal family's faction? Artificial death. Artificial death. As Klein thought, he suddenly recalled that there was a matter that no one knew other than himself and Mr. Azek. The Evernight goddess had preliminary gained control of the death pathway's uniqueness. In other words, artificial death. Presently, she was usurping, digesting, and wielding the corresponding authority. In other words, the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's target of belief was, in a way, the Evernight goddess. After the authority was fully transferred and seized, they were bound to suffer a purge before slowly merging with the Church of Evernight. Or they might continue their work, making contact with the other numinous episcopate factions and other secret factions while unnoticeably cooperating with the Nighthawks. To Klein, this wasn't anything of importance. What was important was, that in an ancient text he found before, it mentioned, to artificially create death, a number of numinous episcopate members had to pray to the uniqueness daily, as though it was a true deity. It was an attempt to slowly awaken its sentience and allow it to come to life. Of course, this was only one part of the overall plan which wasn't critical. Then, could it be possible that when Palenque to Siblius prayed to artificial death, he had mentioned Insangwil's motives and had sought blessings? But he will probably never imagine that artificial death has already been controlled by the Evernight goddess. Although it hasn't become part of her manifestation, it has already lost its freedom. From this angle, directly setting up a ritual to pray to the goddess might allow one to obtain Insangwil's motives. That's quite possible. The more Klein thought about it, the more certain he was that his seemingly ridiculous plan would succeed. And as for the reason why this could become a reality, it was because the enemy's leader was their spy. After getting Enzo to stop massaging him, Klein slowly got up and paced about, considering if he should make the attempt, and if so, how. Insangwil is a traitor of the church. He's an insult to all Nighthawks. If there's a chance to wipe him out, the goddess should be very willing to see it happen. She wouldn't mind providing some help. But the goddess is now in a critical stage of seizing the artificial death's authority. She will not be able to provide answers for a long period of time, and she can only provide feedback to normal ritualistic magic. Besides, I also lack the corresponding materials. Also, I've been constantly warning myself to be on guard. I must not fully trust and rely on the goddess. On second thoughts, directly praying to her, to obtain a revelation might not be too good. I hope to maintain a safe distance. Amidst his thoughts, Klein felt a little hesitant. He began letting his thoughts wander in a bid to find a more acceptable plan. Suddenly he had a more ridiculous idea. Directly pray to artificial death. This actually posed no danger. This was because artificial death wasn't able to respond to prayers and rituals. If there was any feedback, it meant that it was essentially controlled by the Evernight goddess. On the other hand, Klein had the feather produced and left behind from the artificial death project. He also had Azek's copper whistle. He didn't need to spend too much time to gather the ingredients needed to set up a ritual for a revelation. In addition, there's a layer in between us. I'm not directly contacting the goddess. Perhaps this might even help her further seize artificial death's authority. Klein consoled himself as he began busying himself. He first used the sacrificial and bestowment ritual. He brought back the 2 remaining feathers and some full moon essence oil, night vanilla powder, and other items which he had not used in a while to the real world. Then he modified the sacrificial altar and completed the first part of the preparations. After all, he was essentially praying to the Evernight goddess. He couldn't be bothered to head out to buy ritualistic materials of the death domain. This was essentially the same as other normal ritualistic magic. With great familiarity, Klein lit the candles, dripped some essential oils, and drew the symbols for human and concealment on an artificial goatskin. Then in the thin fog that spread, he pressed Azek's copper whistle over it. Immediately after that, he placed the white feather stained with pale yellow oil stains inside the silver bowl that had burning herbal powder. He then watched it curl without any signs of it turning black. After exhaling silently, Klein took a step back and chanted in Hermes. You are the essence of death. You are the Lord of the dead. You are the final home to all living beings. I pray for your help. I pray for you to tell me the motives for Ensanguil's contact with the numinous episcopate. 2-2 Just as he said those words, the 3 candlelight burgeoned as though they brightened significantly, but were tainted with a dark green. The surroundings turned cold and creepy. Klein closed his eyes and entered cogitation for 30 seconds, feeling uneasy. He walked in front of the altar, picked up the full moon essence oil, and dripped 1 drop onto each of the 3 candles. After doing this, he took away Azek's copper whistle, grabbed the artificial goatskin, and moved it close to the candlelight representing himself. When it ignited, he threw it into the silver bowl. With a whoosh, the white feather, which didn't show any signs of damage, soared with pale white flames, covering the entire silver bowl and obstructing Klein's vision. About 3 seconds later, the fire subsided, leaving a mound of powder in the silver bowl. The powder moved without the help of any wind, forming one word after another. Possessed by an evil spirit. Requires exorcism. Chapter 932 Thin-skinned. The goddess really replied. Upon seeing the words formed by the powder, Klein's first reaction had nothing to do with the content. Instead, he was shocked that this seemingly ridiculous thing had happened. Although he was already mentally prepared and had believed that the chance of success was rather high, he still felt conflicting emotions. It took him almost a minute to accept it. After a while, Klein exhaled slowly, raised his right hand, and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner. Praise the lady. He then ended the ritual, forcing himself to focus his attention on the revelation itself. Possessed by an evil spirit. Requires exorcism? Ensanguil actually got possessed by an evil spirit? He had gone from sequence 9 to sequence 5 of the death pathway. The godhood he obtained at the critical stage is also sequence 4 Nightwatcher of the Evernight pathway, one that is good at dealing with spirit body type creatures. Evil spirits and wraiths should be afraid of him, so why would he end up being possessed? That's unless the evil spirit's level is extremely high or, at its core, is very special. Unfortunately, I've only met one evil spirit in the truest sense of the word. It's that ancient evil spirit sealed in the underground ruins of Alistitutor. I know little about such monsters, so it's difficult for me to grasp the details. I can write to ask Miss Sharon. I can also get Little Son to find out more. That shepherd elder Lovia had grazed an evil spirit. It's no wonder Ensanguil is trying to meet a demigod of the numinous episcopate. When it comes to exorcising evil spirits, aside from the Church of Evernight and Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, the best would probably be the numinous episcopate. There's probably the Church of the God of Combat as well. Neighboring pathways often have similar traits. There's also one point that can be gleaned from this. Ensanguil doesn't wish for his possessed state to be known by the royal family faction and the Demonist sect who are in cahoots with him. Otherwise, there's no need for him to come all the way to the southern continent. The 2 factions existed before the 5th epoch, and they have a long legacy. It's quite unlikely that they don't have a sealed artifact that can remove or exorcise evil spirits. Even if they can't find one, getting the Demonist sect to contact the numinous episcopate is definitely safer and more covert than getting Ensanguil to make the trip himself. As his thoughts raced, Klein unfolded a piece of paper and wrote, "The intel you have provided me made me connect certain clues from what I've previously gathered. and due to a particular great existence's help. This points to a clear conclusion. Ensanguil is possessed by an evil spirit, and he's seeking the numinous episcopate's help. Just based on this fact alone, we can make several useful judgments. Ensanguil will often manifest inconsistency in his words and actions. He will often deviate from his normal path, doing something we feel that is absolutely impossible for him to do, and to make mistakes we find incomprehensible. Before this problem is resolved, he will not stop having contact with the numinous episcopate. It might even become more frequent. Making investigations based on this might allow us to catch Ensanguil by the tail. However, I believe we still wouldn't be able to lock onto him. The creation of coincidences from that grade O sealed artifact is insurmountable. Upon writing this, Klein couldn't help but recall his direct encounter with Ensanguil. His own investigations didn't directly point to him, but it caused their ploy to nearly fail. Hence, Ensanguil personally took action, sending a meteor falling from the sky in an attempt to kill Sherlock Moriarty, so as to obliterate any clues. And he ultimately received Mr. Azek's help and escaped the dire situation, forcing Ensanguil to step into the limelight and expose himself. Back then, if Mr. Azek had recovered to his former strength, Ensanguil might already be dead. But to replicate such a situation and force him to appear before me is still extremely difficult. After all, back then, not only was there Mr. Azek, a death consul, and my use of the grey fog to foil the coincidences, there was also Trissy Cheek and the ring which was suspected to be a grade O sealed artifact. Without her suddenly escaping, Ensanguil wouldn't have been forced to personally take action. Klein deliberated as he wrote. If we can figure out the origins and primary goals of the evil spirit, there might be a chance of the situation having a favorable change. After writing the matters regarding Ensanguil, Klein's heart stirred. Just as he was about to mention something else, he stopped his pen after writing the first few letters. He raised his left hand and pinched his cheeks. He appeared to be in a serious dilemma and seemed a little embarrassed. After muttering silently a few times, Klein finally smoothly wrote the rest. Even without that grade O sealed artifact's help, Ensanguil is an enemy you and I are unable to face head-on. We need to make plenty of preparations. If you can provide me with some worms of time, I can use them to create high-level charms that can deal with demigods. It's called a fate siphon charm. It can swap the fates of yourself and the target for a short period of time. Putting down his fountain pen, Klein didn't take a second look as he quickly folded the letter and seriously sealed it in an envelope. He then took out the adventurer's harmonica and a gold coin before summoning Miss Messenger. He got her to take away the reply letter to Leonard Mitchell, but this time, it wasn't addressed to 7 Pinsta Street. Instead, it was directly sent to Leonard's present address. With Leonard having just written the letter, Klein didn't believe that he had moved out of Rionette Tinker's detection range. After doing all of this, Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he shook his head slightly. Requesting the help of others is really a difficult task. It's even more so for someone as thin-skinned as me. He quickly retracted his attention, and once again modified Enzo's and Ludwell's appearances. After all, they had been seen by Angel of Fate Ouroboros during their exploration of Calderon City. During this process, Klein suddenly had an idea. He planned on sending them above the grey fog, and using the Spirit World Plunderer's true soul body for a disguise. The Spirit World Plunderer could make its soul avatars take the form of its true soul body, and it could also get them to disguise themselves as other Spirit World creatures. The Beyonder ingredient it left behind must have had such abilities. However, it would be difficult to use it with the poor effects and the huge negative side effects. However, this wasn't a problem for Klein, who possessed the mysterious space above the grey fog. After all, he didn't plan on using the Beyonder ingredient for actual combat. Doing some changes to his marionette didn't require too many smooth operations and great effects. Furthermore, this could be slowly adjusted. As for the negative effects that came from the godhood, it wasn't something to consider. Who wasn't obedient when left in the junk pile? After a series of tasks, Klein sat at the high back chair of the Fool. In his hand was the palm-sized Spirit World Plunderer's true soul body. Without looking down to look at it in detail, He extended his spirituality bit by bit into it. There wasn't much changes to the scene before him. It was still the illusory and dense black spirit body threads. However, when he tried controlling them, he discovered that not only could he control the marionette's spirit body threads, but he could also let his spirit body threads extend out and penetrate into their bodies. When both sides established such a two-way connection, Klein suddenly felt that he and his marionette was one. All his Beyonder powers could be enacted on the other party through the spirit body threads, including his trick for changing his appearance and body. Amidst a slow and difficult process, Klein felt rather groggy as he felt his emotions turned into a mess. He began showing signs of losing control. This was an inevitable outcome from having his spirituality make direct contact with godhood. He hurriedly diverted some attention to stir some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, and he restored his condition back to its normal state. After enduring the torment, Klein finished his attempt. Enzo had transformed into a southern continent native that looked like he came from a plantation. Ludwell had a mixed blood feel to him. His ghastly face was no longer more bone than flesh. Instead, there was a plumpness to it. As for the silver mask that had the effect of placating the soul, there was no way of removing it for the time being. All Klein could do was let it stick to Ludwell's chest. This still had a certain level of effect, but it was inferior to wearing it on his face. It could barely maintain the status quo. Unfortunately, there's no way to change this mask into other types of accessories. Otherwise, it would save me quite a bit of trouble. As Klein rushed to throw the spirit world plunderer's true soul body back onto the junk pile, he rubbed his temples and allowed his thoughts to wander. Right. I still have a soul assurer Beyonder characteristic here that can be made into a mystical item to replace that mask. No, I've always planned on returning it to the church. I'll mail it to him when Leonard replies. After the discomfort slowly subsided, Klein took out his golden pocket watch and opened it to check the time. Following that, he summoned a paper figurine and stirred some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. He then threw both into a specially labeled point of light. It was the point of light representing the fool's only believer at present, Danitz. From Klein's point of view, Admiral of Stars Katlia had the Moses ascetic order backing her. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina was from the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom. Anderson Hood didn't know much about Gehrman Sparrow, and being good at identifying the situation he was in, he wasn't one to put on a brave front. Therefore, when the Aurora Order did an investigation, it was unlikely that they would be in grave danger. Danitz was the only exception. With him in West Balam and not able to return to the Golden Dream anytime soon, his lacking strength, and him often wearing the boxing glove that made him act rashly, it was truly worrisome. Due to this fact, Mr. Fool had to work a little harder. He gave Danitz a paper angel's embrace every day at a fixed time, so as to disrupt any divination or prophecies about him. Leonard never expected Klein Moretti to reply that quickly. With some level of incredulity, he opened the envelope and read the corresponding content. Due to a particular great existence's help. Is he referring to the Fool? Indeed, Klein's investigations into Ensangual has already reached a significant depth. He has already figured out the truth the moment I mentioned the numinous episcopate. Possessed by an evil spirit? How did he end up being possessed by an evil spirit? How do we make use of it? Worms of time. This. Leonard quickly scanned through the last part of the letter as his expression suddenly became complicated. In his mind, Pallas Zoros maintained his silence without saying a word. Chapter 933 Evil Spirits Common Trait. After a while, Leonard cleared his throat and wore a smile without realizing it. He said with a suppressed voice, "Old man Kleins, this suggestion seems pretty good. It's very, very viable. The effects should be quite substantial. Why don't you consider it? Didn't you mention that you would do your best to help me exact revenge? Haha, I thought Worms of Time could only be used for avatars and act as support." He subconsciously droned on while Pallas Zoros remained silent the entire time. Only after a while did he sigh lightly and say, "I can only give you a maximum of 2 Worms of Time." Without waiting for Leonard to say a word, he added, To exact revenge on a demigod who wields a great sealed artifact, the most important thing is still your own level and strength. Otherwise, you won't have a chance of using it even if you have a high-level charm. Leonard wiped away his smile and nodded seriously. I'll do my best digesting my potion. If you finish digesting it and fail to accumulate enough contribution points, I'll help you seek out the Beyonder ingredients needed for Spirit Warlock. As for only having 2 worms of time, he wasn't disappointed at all. It was already a bonus. Just getting 1 was a great boon. Having 2 meant that he and Klein could split it, each of them having 1 Fate Siphon charm. After expressing his attitude, he asked in puzzlement, "Old man, do you think Klein has already used the previous Worm of Time as a charm?" He remembered very clearly that, back when they were figuring out who Emlyn White was supporting, Old Man had parasitized Tinder with a Worm of Time. Later, it lost contact and failed to be of any use. Now on retrospection, just Emlyn White's and Sherlock Moriarty's close relationship made it easy for him to figure out the truth. The Worm of Time had been eliminated by the upper echelons of the secret organization, or even the Fool himself. Furthermore, there was a high chance that it had been bestowed to Klein. Otherwise, his former colleague wouldn't have known of the existence of the Worm of Time. Pallas Zorost immediately scoffed. If he hasn't already used it and seen its effects, why would he raise the issue and ask for more? All right. I need to separate the Worms of Time. This will make me fall asleep for at least 2 weeks. If you have any questions, find someone to answer them by yourself. With that said, not giving Leonard a chance to raise further questions, he scattered his spirituality and created a blob of light that hung high inside Leonard's mind as though he didn't wish to speak. Leonard's instinctive response was to chuckle dryly. He focused his attention back onto the letter from Klein Moretti as he carefully read it again. Possessed by an evil spirit. The origins and primary goals of the evil spirit. I don't know much about evil spirits. Nothing comes to mind. After a few minutes of thought, Leonard took out a matchbox and burned the letter. Then he left the room which the local Nighthawks had assigned him at the last minute. He came to a room diagonally opposite his and knocked on the door. Before long, Daly, who hadn't removed her blue eyeshadow and blush, opened the door and pricked up her eyebrows. When did a sleepless have the courage to knock on a lady's door at a time highly associated with a bed? Ahem. I have some questions I'd like to consult you about. Leonard obviously didn't dare respond to Daly's comment as he immediately expressed the reason why he was here. Daly sized him up and chuckled. I'm not responsible for counseling minors. As she spoke, she made way and allowed Leonard to enter her room. Without daring to let his eyes wander, he casually pulled a round stool to sit on. He then went straight to the point. Ma'am, I'd like to know more about evil spirits. You're a sequence 5 of the death pathway. You have higher clearance than me. You should know quite a lot. Why are you asking me this? Daly propped herself with her hands on the edge of the table behind her. Without waiting for him to reply, she continued. Most evil spirits are the result of dead high-sequence Beyonders. A small number of them are wraiths who break through various restrictions via using various opportunities. The first situation is more common. After high-sequence Beyonders consume a potion to obtain godhood, their soul body would have experienced a mutation. It would be a mutation at their core. This allows their soul body to remain even in death, or when their powers are dispersed. There will be a certain level of divinity to it, making them rather terrifying. The second situation isn't different on a fundamental level. Normally speaking, evil spirits will weaken with the passage of time until they completely dissipate. However, they can also assimilate into the region where they were born, making the spirit world and even the underworld fuse with it. They then extract power from this to maintain their existence. Therefore, many evil spirits have their own territory and active range. It's not that they do not wish to leave, but they can't. The only exception is when they accumulate sufficient power, allowing their existence to experience a fundamental change. Leonard habitually crossed his right leg over his left and pressed in thought. Can evil spirits leave their territory by possessing a person? Yes, but ordinary humans and most Beyonders are unable to withstand the extraction effect the evil spirits have on their bodies. They will quickly lose their spirituality and body temperature, and be unable to last long. As Daly spoke, she raised her hand to point at herself. The best method is to rely on beyonders of the death pathway. Of course, it has to be at least a sequence 5, because from Gatekeeper, we will have our own dead spirit prison in our bodies. It can be called a miniature underworld. It can provide an evil spirit with an adequate environment for their existence. Once you become a spirit warlock, you will also have similar powers. However, it will be more about sealing and sleeping than an internal underworld. Haha, those natural spirits and wraiths are truly troublesome when they come in and out. In Sanguil's sequence 5 is Gatekeeper. It's no wonder that the evil spirit can possess him for long periods of time. Or could it be that he failed at an attempt to enslave an evil spirit? Leonard's thoughts opened up as he immediately made connections. He deliberated for a few seconds before asking, "What sort of needs does an evil spirit have?" Needs. Singing? Dancing? Poetry? Men? Women? The sea of stars? Daly returned with a question, amused. Leonard realized that his usage of words was problematic as he awkwardly ruffled his hair. I mean, what desires will an evil spirit have? That depends on what it desired while it was alive. Typically speaking, the remnant spirit will inherit the original obsessions, without being able to balance it rationally. If it were you, that evil spirit might attempt to write poems, imprison a group of spectators, and seek acknowledgement. Or it will do things in an ostentatious manner like the protagonist of a play, Daly joked. However, regardless of what it was while it was alive, as long as one becomes an evil spirit, they commonly desire two things. What are they? Leonard turned attentive. Daly shot a glance at him and said, "First, it's to feed on the souls of living creatures. This can pleasure them, an innate pleasure that stems from the need to maintain their existence. In addition, a large number of souls will allow them to escape the restrictions of their territory and active range. It will replace the power provided by the spirit world and underworld. Second, it's to seek out beyonder ingredients from their pathway while they were alive. Through this, they could create another foundation. At a certain stage, the evil spirit would no longer need to draw on the powers of the spirit world and underworld. They would no longer be restricted by their territories or active range. In a sense, they would have transformed into a special spirit world creature." Leonard seemed to realize something as he thought. This also means that evil spirits can consume sequence potions. No, sequence potions are created for human consumption. They reduce the risk of losing control. To many supernatural creatures, there's no need to do so. They can directly consume the ingredient raw. It's especially so for evil spirits. Their obsession, cruelty, ferociousness, and penchant for souls make them half crazy to begin with. There's no need to regulate it from other sources. Furthermore, they are spirit bodies, so the method of consumption is direct accommodation and slow digestion. Daly corrected Leonard's point. This, to the evil spirit that possesses in Sanguil, whenever it has the upper hand, it will control the body to seek out beyonder ingredients of its pathway while it was alive. Leonard was first surprised before he had an idea. He said in a pleasant surprise, "I understand. Thank you for answering my questions." With that said, he hesitated for a few seconds and asked after some deliberation, "Ma'am, I believe we shouldn't just figure out the motives behind Sanguil's meeting with the numinous episcopate demigod, but we also need to track his trajectory since Backlund to East Balam. We need to know what he did midway, what items he found. This might lead us to effective clues." Daly suddenly fell silent before she pricked up her brows and said, "Well said. But what does this have to do with evil spirits?" "Nothing. I raised the question so as to make preparations because I believe that since we are investigating the numinous episcopate, we might encounter evil spirits. The latter half was a suggestion I wished to make after the break. I just wished to talk to you about it beforehand." Leonard's mind raced as he slowed down his speech and fabricated an excuse on the spot. Daly listened in silence and chuckled. "If you actually work so hard to fabricate stories in front of other girls, you'll no longer be single with those looks of yours. Unfortunately, I'm not a clueless girl. All right, there's no need to explain further. Leave." Leonard stood up lamely without trying to emphasize his point. He then walked towards the door. Just as he gripped the handle, Daly's slightly ethereal voice sounded behind him. I don't know what secret you're hiding, nor do I know what you know. None of that matters. But when it comes to Ensanguil, if you need any help or aid, you can find me. Leonard paused for 2 seconds as his mouth quivered. He then pulled open the door and walked out. City of Silver. Derek Berg had received the order to join an expedition team. Leading it was Chief Colin Iliad. Their target was Noise City. It was in a northern city's ruins where the shapeshifter and other terrifying creatures lived. Chapter 934 1 + 1 greater than 2 Ever since the information about the suspected Bizarro Bane shapeshifter was given to Mr. World, Derek constantly believed that the latter might one day entrust him with a mission for the corresponding ingredients. However, his strength was lacking. Even with his friends, it was impossible for him to complete the hunt. Furthermore, such expeditions needed to go through the 6-member council. Private teams were unable to wander too far from the City of Silver. Therefore, all he could do was temporarily suppress it deep down. From time to time, it was used to motivate him to advance quicker. To his surprise, it didn't take long before an expedition team headed for Noise City was set up. Leading the team was Chief Colin Iliad. Combining his previous discussion with Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and company at the recent tarot gathering, Derek quickly came up with a theory. During the exploration of the former chief's mausoleum, Mr. Fool had provided a certain level of help to the present chief, allowing him to foil the fallen creator's ploy and successfully resolve certain matters. Hence, noticing his search for information, the demon hunter had decided to hunt a shapeshifter to please the deity. This is a necessary way to curry favor, and is also a kind of equivalent exchange. The Hanged Man's words resounded in Derek's mind. It made him no longer puzzled over the matter. So taking the opportunity before he set out, he prayed to Mr. Fool and requested him to inform Mr. World of this expedition. He quickly received a response and heard Mr. World say, if the hunting of the Bizarro Bane is difficult or dangerous, the requirements can be lowered. Attempt to extract its blood. As long as you obtain it, I'll trade for it with the Priest of Light's Beyonder characteristic. Priest of Light's Beyonder characteristics? Mr. World already has the Priest of Light Beyonder characteristic? Or could it be that he has locked onto a target and will quickly be able to obtain it? With the chief's strength and the teamwork of the expedition team, there's a high chance of success if it's just extracting the blood. Derek felt relieved as he held Thunder God's roar and left his residence, heading straight for the training field. Just as he arrived at his destination, he saw Chief Colin Iliad. The latter carried 2 swords on his back. He was tall and staid, leaving anyone who saw him at ease. And beside this demon hunter was another person. She was wearing a black robe with purple patterns, and she had long, curly, silver-gray hair. Shepherd Lovia, who was apparently participating in this expedition, turned her head as her pale gray eyes reflected Derek Berg's figure. However, there was only calm in her eyes. Derek felt a baffling sense of alarm as he involuntarily slowed down his pace. East Balam above the gray fog. Klein deeply approved of the City of Silver's chief's organization of an expedition to Noise City. He also informed Little Sun that there was no need to take risks. All he needed was some blood of the target for the completion of the mission. When the time came, he could smear the blood over Grozel's travels, bring all his gear, and challenge the Bizarro Bane on his turf, thus obtaining the Beyonder ingredients he needed. Klein had also considered the possibility of whether Grozel's travels' ability to swallow people into the book's world was screened by the uniqueness of the forsaken land of the gods. He had also come up with a solution. It was to bestow Little Sun with Grozel's travels. After achieving the goal, he could get Little Sun to sacrifice it back. In addition, he wasn't worried about the Bizarro Bane lacking blood, because of its nature as a spirit world creature. This was because the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula clearly wrote, supplementary ingredients, 200 milliliters of a Bizarro Bane's blood. There are always more solutions than problems. Klein muttered in satisfaction before returning to the real world. Before sleeping, he received a reply from Leonard Mitchell. It mentioned that it would take another day for the Worm of Time, and he described the monsters known as evil spirits in detail. Another day before it can be provided. And there will be 2 of them. The grandpa in Leonard's body has quite a good attitude, unable to leave the territory, limited in activity range. Their common trait is to devour the souls of living creatures, and to desire beyonder ingredients from their pathway from when they were still alive. This also means that the evil spirit will seek out the corresponding ingredients and beyonder characteristics when it wields control over Nsangwil's body. This is indeed a direction for investigation. Klein held the letter as he read and thought. Suddenly, he recalled something. Back when he encountered Nsangwil on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea, the latter had been pursued by a powerful demigod from the Hunter pathway. Could it be a result of that evil spirit? I previously imagined that Nsangwil had received a commission by some faction in the royal family, and did something that targeted the Intis Republic, only to have a mistake happen, thus exposing himself and getting pursued by their powerhouses. From the looks of it, there might be another possibility. That evil spirit desires the beyonder characteristics of the Hunter pathway, and when it could control Nsangwil's body, it attempted to hunt beyonders of the same pathway. This might have succeeded or failed. In short, the result was that he was targeted by a powerful demigod from the Hunter pathway. He pursued him the entire journey with his intuition as a hunter. The more Klein thought about it, the more convinced he was that his theory was close to reality. This was the only way to explain why Nsangwil, who wielded 0-08, was discovered. At this moment, Enzo and Ludwell were kneeling down, massaging Klein's legs. I can guess that it's an evil spirit of the Hunter pathway for now. I'll later write back to Leonard and get him to steer the investigations in this direction. This fellow's acting isn't that great, nor does he have the psychological experience. I wonder if he will end up exposing himself. Perhaps he will explain it away with some non-existent informant. Hunter pathway evil spirit. Hunter pathway evil spirit. Klein's eyes suddenly widened as he suddenly sat up, leaving his 2 marionettes at a loss. There weren't many evil spirits he knew, and he had only seen one. However, that one happened to be from the Hunter pathway. It was Red Angel Medici's main body that had combined with the remnant psyches of the 2 Sequence 1 angel from the Sauron and Einhorn families. When it came to the Hunter pathway, there was no evil spirit that was of an even higher level. That was unless Blood Emperor Alista Tudor still had his psyche remaining. Previously, Nsangwil was in Backlund. That evil spirit, who I'm not sure if I should call Medici, was also in Backlund. Later, that evil spirit escaped the seal, and its whereabouts are unknown. As for Nsangwil, he suffered from the possession of an evil spirit. Both sides are evil spirits from the Hunter pathway. Could the one possessing Nsangwil be the Red Angel evil spirit? Klein frowned bit by bit, almost finding his theory unbelievable. However, he found it very possible. As his thoughts raced, he found another indirect piece of evidence. The unique trait of 0-08 is that once you know it, it will also know you. And as a king of angels who survived from the second epoch, Red Angel Medici probably knows all kinds of details about 0-08. In other words, as long as the evil spirit attempted to recall anything related to 0-08, 0-08 would know of it and establish a connection. Right, there was that sentence. Pleasure working with you. No way. But the problem lies in the fact that I previously suspected that evil spirit to have one sequence, one characteristic. There's no need for it to seek any more of it. Could it be that it hasn't digested it? Klein rubbed his temples as his head ached. He stood up, entered his bathroom, and took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the gray fog. Just as he sat down, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the following divination statement. The one possessing Nsangwil is the evil spirit back in the underground ruins of Alista Tudor. He scrutinized each word for a few seconds before taking off the topaz pendant on his left wrist, and planned to use spirit dowsing for the divination. This time, the scene he saw when he opened his eyes was, the topaz pendant stood still. This meant that the divination had failed. The level is too high and there's 0-08. Right, that evil spirit also carried the red priest card that has anti-divination and anti-prophecy properties. It's no wonder I failed with the three combined. This is also an indirect confirmation. Klein analyzed the reason and considered what other ways he could make a verification. He tapped his finger on the edge of the long bronze table and silently muttered to himself, apart from getting Leonard to lead the Red Gloves to do an investigation, I should do something as well. Assuming that the one possessing Ensanguil is really the Red Angel evil spirit, where will it seek out Beyonder ingredients from the hunter pathway when it gains control of the body? Intis's capital, Trier? Faceac capital, St. Millum? Or would it solely rely on the card of blasphemy's activation and seal in order to use the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence to attract Beyonders to fly to it like moths flying to a fire? Wait, it mentioned before that the descendants of the Medici family are in Bansi Harbor. Although it has already been destroyed, there might still be something buried there. Also, the evil spirit with the three angels' remnant spirit has very potent provocative traits. This matches Leonard's description of evil spirits in the letter. It might have deliberately left something in Bansi. With this in mind, Klein immediately conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow's figure and requested the hanged man to head to Bansi once more to do a more thorough investigation. After doing that, Klein began contemplating. Once he confirmed that Ensanguil had the Red Angel evil spirit in him, he wondered if he could use the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence as a starting point, enticing Ensanguil into the trap he set up using the corresponding ingredients. Hunter pathway. Hunter pathway. Amidst his thoughts, Klein suddenly recalled two hunters who were loitering in West Balam. He frowned slightly and began analyzing. Although East Balam and West Balam are vast territories, and the distance between the city that Ensanguil made his last appearance and the northern state is very great, he will probably take nearly half a month to travel, even as a demigod since he doesn't have teleport. In theory, Danitz and Anderson will not suddenly encounter the Red Angel evil spirit because of the law of convergence. Also, their sequences are too low, but I can't be too sure. West Balam, Northern State, Kukua City. Danitz shot a glance at Anderson and blurted out, I'm going to do some investigations. Why are you following me? Logically speaking, shouldn't you head back to the Fog Sea at Barons Harbor? Chapter 935. Meeting up. Anderson, who was enjoying a piece of cream cassava bread, looked up at Danitz. Seemingly in thought, he said, I'm not sure why, but I don't wish to leave West Balam. Since I'm here as a treasure hunter, how can I return empty-handed? In the extensive forests, there are all sorts of abandoned temples that have gold, jewelry, antiques, and maybe mystical items. All of them are waiting for me to rescue them. Danitz tipped his chin and guzzled down the remaining water. This was a beverage made from a fruit native to West Balam. It was orange-yellow in color with a sweetness amidst its sourness. It was good at quenching thirst and relieving heat. It also had some caffeine that allowed people to combat fatigue and stay awake. Putting down the cup and picking up his napkin to wipe his mouth, Danitz scoffed. I keep feeling as though you're up to something. I also hope that's the case, Anderson said with an unconcerned smile. He matched breakfast with coffee. In East and West Balam, there were many excellent coffee-bearing lands. They were just slightly less famous than Fainapotter's Highlander coffee, the Southern Continent's Highlander coffee, and the Star Highlands and the nearby Paws Valley's Fermo coffee. Without waiting for Danitz's reply, Anderson said with a smile, Actually, isn't this good? I'm providing you with free protection, and you're my interpreter. Everyone benefits out of this arrangement. Recalling that he was only a Sequence 7, and was wanted by all kinds of factions, Danitz had a baffling feeling that Anderson's words made sense. He coughed slightly and said, But there will be certain times when I'll get you to stay away. If you say please, then there's no problem, Anderson said in a relaxed manner. Danitz immediately hooded himself and walked towards the hotel's exit in preparation to begin today's investigations. Midway, he suddenly said, Have you had such an experience? Often dreaming of an angel's descent, wrapping you in its layered wings. No, it's not only a dream. I occasionally will have the same hallucination, even when I'm awake. Anderson glanced at the boxing glove Danitz was wearing. After pondering for a few seconds, he said with a smile, "Are you a believer of some secret existence? Or have you made contact with some ancient item?" Danitz's expression froze as he forced a smile. "If it were as simple as you said, I would have long guessed the reason." As he spoke, he brushed shoulders with the three men who came in before walking out. Anderson habitually sized up the passers-by to confirm his surroundings. Therefore, he glanced at the three men and realized that they were a master and two servants. The master was tall and his skin was brown. He had soft facial features, as though he had parents from Balam and Lone. He wore attire in the style of the northern continent: silk top hat, black formal suit, and a gold inlaid cane. The two servants were standard locals that seemed to come from plantations. They were helping their master hold his cane and leather suitcase. One of them was a mixed blood with a fleshy face and baggy clothes. On his waist was a rapier, as though he was also playing the role of a bodyguard. Unconcerned, Anderson retracted his gaze and followed Danitz onto the street. He pointed at the different styled coffins that were horse-drawn or manually lifted with piqued interest. "Want to try one of those? It's very interesting. Once you get used to it, you will realize that death isn't something to be afraid of. Perhaps you might be able to open the lid at some point in time and stand up again." Danitz looked at the strange transportation tool through the corner of his eyes as he didn't hesitate to shake his head. "As a pirate, I more or less believe in the Lord of Storms. Certain things are taboo, and one of them is to stay away from coffins. I'm different. I don't have any taboos." Anderson casually took out a few Delexi and bought a few sets of newspapers from the paperboy on the street. It had to be said that when it came to paperboys, the various cities in the southern continent weren't inferior to the northern continent. After all, manual labor was cheaper, and there were many children who needed to supplement their family's income. As Danitz walked to the end of the street in search of a carriage meant for foreigners, he took a copy of the newspapers from Anderson and quickly browsed through it. Suddenly, he noticed a piece of news. Infamous pirate who calls himself Admiral Hell, Ludwell, has been killed by the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. His Black Tulip and entire crew has been taken over by Morella, who claims to be Death's envoy. This, Danitz's mouth turned slightly agape, and he was hardly able to close it. He finally understood why Gehrman Sparrow wanted him to be careful of the numinous episcopate. This lunatic had actually killed the strongest of the 7 pirate admirals, Ludwell. About 10 seconds later, Danitz handed the newspapers to Anderson with a dazed expression. "Take a look at this." Anderson received the newspaper with a smile and quickly scanned through it. After a brief silence, he whistled and chuckled. "That fellow likely has a new nickname. Pirate Admiral Nemesis." Danitz didn't dare to nod as he poignantly said, "Back when I first met him, although I already found him terrifying, I never expected him to be this terrifying." At this moment, he recalled his early attempts of recruiting Gehrman Sparrow as a sailor of the Golden Dream. And while they left the hotel, Klein had already taken up residence in a luxurious room. He was standing by the window, watching the two hunters who were being flippant while walking. Rubbing the cufflink on his sleeves, he unfolded the letter and wrote, "I suspect that the evil spirit that possesses Insanguil is from the Hunter pathway. You can carry out more investigations in this regard." Along with this letter is a soul assurer's beyonder characteristic. It comes from a pitiful person who was grazed. I liberated him and promised to return his characteristic to the Church of Evernight. In East Balam, having just prepared to join the morning meeting, Leonard suddenly saw the angel messenger who wielded 4 blonde, red-eyed heads appear before him. Already used to this, he received the letter and opened it and gave it a glance. He was surprised to see an item as resplendent as the night sky. Leonard had an inkling as to what the item was. He hurriedly unfolded the letter and read it. 20 seconds later, he slowly sighed and silently said, as expected, "It's a beyonder characteristic. Klein is still very friendly to the Church and the Nighthawks." He was rather delighted as he took out 2 transparent dead, ringed worms and placed it in that envelope. He then summoned Gehrman Sparrow's messenger, handed it to her, and paid the 1 gold coin. After doing this, Leonard loosened the top buttons of his shirt, walked out the room, and headed underground. On the way, he encountered Daily Simone. Still dressed as a spirit medium, Daily looked forward and asked very normally, "Any new clues?" "It's suspected to be an evil spirit of the Hunter pathway." Leonard fell silent for 2 seconds before he decided against concealing the matter. Daily nodded indiscernibly and said after some thought, "Then it might have the instinct of being provocative. It will proactively leave clues for us. Of course, this might also contain some level of misdirection to it." Knock. 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 Someone knocked at the captain's cabin of the Blue Avenger. "Come on in." Alger put down the brass sextant in his hand and said in a deep voice. A sailor opened the door and looked back. With the urging of his companions, he hesitantly entered the room and struck his left breast with his right fist and bowed. "Holy Lord of Storms." After Alger did the same response, he forced a smile and said, "Captain, many pirates and sailors from merchant ships have been recently saying that they found valuable items in the ruins of Bansi Harbor. There was even gold. We don't have any particularly important missions recently, so everyone is wondering if we should make another trip to Bansi. Such a bustling harbor, even if it has been searched numerous times, it should still have plenty of things left." Alger listened with a deadpan expression. After a few seconds of thought, he said, "I can understand your feelings. Let's do this. Let's head in the direction of Bansi Harbor, but do not set a destination. If nothing happens midway, we will stay there for a day." "Aye, Captain." The sailor excitedly clenched his right fist and struck his left breast again. "May the storm be with you. May the storm be with you." Alger watched as his subordinate left and closed the door. Then, as though nothing had happened, he poured himself a cup of Lanty-proof without any joy or anger as he sipped it slowly. Whatever that had just happened was within his expectations. This was because the news of finding items of value in Bansi Harbor's ruins was something he had spread while disguised. As a captain of the Church of Storms, he was constantly monitored by his sailors. Having been to Bansi once, mentioning it again made it suspicious. Therefore, Alger decided on getting the crew to make the request themselves. That way, even if they discovered anything or encountered something at Bansi Harbor, no one would suspect him, the captain. To the sailors, especially sailors who had just spent all their money in Byam, any news or rumors with sufficient allure would stir their hearts the most. Alger knew this very well. In addition, the Blue Avenger had stayed in Byam for too long. If he hadn't set sail, it would also be suspicious. As for monitoring Artisan Sealf, it was naturally left to the hermit Catlia. Due to the investigations of the Aurora Order, this pirate admiral and the future had recently been hanging around the Rorstad archipelago. It was said to be an important base of the Moses Ascetic Order. After drinking the liquor, Alger put down his cup and looked out at the undulating waves and silently said a word. Bansi, considering how it was late June, and while Septon's birthday was still unclear, Klein did some reorganization before heading above the gray fog to bring the radio transceiver back to the real world. He also warned himself that he could only ask a maximum of 2 questions. In the room that suddenly turned gloomy and cold, the unmanned transceiver began producing clicking voices. Chapter 936. Don't want to miss out amidst the clacking sounds. A white piece of illusory paper spewed out from the radio transceiver. On it were words composed of Loanese. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal and humble servant Erodes, is here to answer your summoning. Did you know? Dr. Aaron Ceres' child was born the night before the last. Thankfully I contacted the magic mirror in time. Klein nodded slightly and said, "Now I know." Amidst clacking sounds, more of the illusory white paper spewed out. Based on the principle of reciprocity, it's your turn to ask a question. Klein had originally wanted to ask about matters regarding Ensanguil, 0-08 and the Red Angel Evil Spirit, but considering how he had failed divining it above the gray fog, it was almost certain that Erodes was unable to see it. At best, it could provide him more detailed information regarding 0-08, but this way, without the gray fog screening, it would be equivalent to him knowing of 0-08, and it would result in it knowing him. It didn't benefit him when it came to hiding behind the scenes to direct a play. After thinking for 2 seconds, he asked, "What means are there to speed up the digestion of potions? Do a better job acting." On the illusory white paper, black words were produced. Upon seeing the magic mirror's reply, Klein first fell silent before he slowly exhaled. For the present him, Nsangwil's appearance was too early. He still needed about 2 months to completely digest the marionettist potion. When that happened, and with him already gathering the ingredients, he could orchestrate an assassination of the demigod, Nsangwil, placing the sequence advancement with his wish together. Then there was no need for him to consider any room for retreat. However, Nsangwil wouldn't appear until he was done preparing everything. He wouldn't follow the steps that Klein had in mind. Based on Klein's earliest ideas, it was to first gather information, figure out where Nsangwil was, and wait until it was late August or early September before confirming the plan based on the situation. If not for the possession of the evil spirit, Nsangwil wouldn't have exposed himself. If he didn't use Nsangwil's current condition, it was very possible that he couldn't find the ladder again once he exorcised the evil spirit. Coincidences would stand in his way when it came to meeting him. Furthermore, if that were really the Red Angel evil spirit, Klein was also worried that Nsangwil might have already died by the time he and Leonard started exacting revenge. The reason behind his death could be due to certain machinations, or from some ridiculously comedic situations, and not because of his sins. Due to these considerations, Klein attempted to digest his potion faster, hoping that he could complete it within a week or 2. However, Rhodes's answer left him depressed. He also knew that this wasn't something he could force. In 2 weeks, or even in the next few days, how was he to create a better opportunity to act? In his silence, Klein had already made up his mind. He didn't plan on tying the two matters together, and from the beginning he wanted revenge against Nsangwil as his primary goal provided there was a chance of success. He didn't wish to miss this opportunity. Although it had only been about 10 months, less than a year since the incident at the Blackthorn Security Company, it felt like a very, very long time, so long that he didn't wish to wait any longer. Catching a glance at the gloomy radio transceiver, Klein thought before wearing a stern look. He asked with a deep voice, "Back when I used the winter marionette to look at myself, I learned why Beyonders of the Fate Pathway will have such a reaction when facing me. Now I would like to know what you see when you look at me?" This question was a bolt out of the blue that seemed to echo in the room. The radio transceiver suddenly fell silent, and the clacking sound sounded after quite a while. A black illusory piece of paper spewed out, and on it were ghastly white words. "I see support and dominance from you. Are you satisfied with such a question? Support, dominance. What does that mean?" Klein had planned on pressing on, but he believed that Rhodes was unlikely to explain it too clearly because it lacked the required knowledge. Realizing that the mother tree of desire was about to find him if he kept this up, he nodded and said, "Acceptable. That shall be all for today. You may return." The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker as the paper that appeared was white again. "All right, great master, goodbye. Your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, is constantly at your service." This time, the magic mirror seemed to forget to add a hand-waving drawing. That was quite a quick escape. Klein mumbled and immediately took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered above the gray fog. He conjured the world Gehrman sparrow and informed the hermit Catlia that the mythical creature blood she needed was ready. She was to provide the means to regain a certain amount of strength during one's weak stages as quickly as possible. Before long, Catlia set up a ritual and sacrificed an item to the fool and requested this mighty existence to hand it to the world and tell him that the principle of the item's effect was to temporarily borrow a portion of one's strength from their former self. This sounds familiar. It sounds like the powers of the Seer Pathways Sequence 3 Scholar of Your. The fool Klein was surprised as he picked up the item that Ma'am Hermit had sacrificed. It was like the end of a cane with a long transparent gem embedded on it. It was carved with complicated, mysterious, indescribable, 3-dimensional symbols and magic labels. Klein recognized 2 of them. One was the incomplete pupilless eye, and the other was the incomplete contorted lines. Could this be an item that really points towards sequence, oh the fool? But isn't it a little too complicated? This cane feels really familiar. It's like the crystal ball little son had used when he prayed to me. See, could it also correspond to another crimson star? Klein looked out the ancient palace with an odd expression, but all he saw were illusory stars suspended in the infinite gray fog without any signs of abnormality. With the fact that such items were one-use items like charms, he abandoned the idea of experimenting with it. All he could do was summon some paper from the junk pile, and seriously record down the complicated and abnormal symbols and magic labels on the cane. Lone Kingdom, Backlund, Dr. Aaron's residence. A maid was inside the master bedroom, taking care of a soundly sleeping infant. Downstairs, the banquet which had many guests attending had reached the midway mark. Suddenly, in a corner, 3 figures quickly materialized. Leading them was a man in a silk top hat, black formal suit. He was none other than Klein Moretti, who hadn't disguised himself. He tossed out a charm and muttered an ancient Hermes term. Crimson. The dark red flames flashed, and amidst a light explosion sound, soothing powers emanated out. The maid fell asleep instantly, collapsing onto the bedside into a deep sleep. Klein made his 2 marionettes stand in their spots as he walked to the infant's cot, and cast his gaze inside. It was a child wrapped in silver silk. His skin was very fair, and he was fleshy with layer after layers. This infant showed no fear towards the stranger as he looked straight at Klein with his eyes wide open while sucking his fingers. Ahem. Klein couldn't help but smile as he took off his hat and bowed. Congratulations on being born. You should say that to my parents. The infant pulled out his fingers and spoke with a bright voice that didn't match his age. Klein chuckled and didn't harp on this meaningless topic with the snake of fate. He went straight to the point. I brought the method that allows you to regain a certain amount of strength during your weak stages. You can now give me that drop of placenta blood. Well, Septon opened up his fleshy palms and said, Let me take a look first. How do you know that the method is an item? Klein couldn't help but ask in puzzlement. Well, Septon scoffed. An intuition of fate. It's like you didn't say a thing. Klein moved the cane from behind him forward and handed it over. The infant held it tightly and glanced at it twice before raising its voice. This can only be used once. That's right. Only once. Is that a problem? Klein deliberated and said, With your level and abilities, you can completely replicate the symbols and magic labels engraved on it, and then prepare the corresponding ingredients to hold the correct ritual. Wouldn't that allow you to use it multiple times? Well, Septon suddenly cut him off. All right, I accept it. Remember, you were the one who suggested it. Klein was momentarily a little dumbfounded, but he also seemed to realize something. He had a vague feeling that, despite him being here to take advantage of a baby, it ended up as the baby taking advantage of him. Yes, I was the one who suggested it. He finally drew a breath and nodded earnestly. The baby's plump face revealed a smile as he spread open his other hand. I've already prepared it for you. A total of 2 drops. 1 drop is for the transaction, and the other drop is your commission for facilitating this transaction. There's a commission? Klein was delighted as he hurriedly looked at Will Septon's palm. There were 2 drops of silver blood there. Each drop appeared to have countless illusory wheels spinning. They formed a belt that had its head connected to its tail. Just one look at it made Klein seem to lose his ability to think. He felt all his thoughts repeatedly appearing in his mind. He hurriedly shook his head and took out the iron cigar case which contained Azek's copper whistle. He then placed the 2 drops of snake of fate blood, which had clearly been sealed, inside. Thank you for your generosity, Klein said sincerely before asking. Can this be used to make a charm? The baby sucked his fingers and said, Of course. As for the exact symbols needed to be carved, you have already seen those. You are free to choose a combination. Whatever you get will all depend on your luck. Klein nodded and asked again. Who should I pray to? You're probably unable to respond to relatively high-level rituals for the time being. And praying to Ouroboros is bordering on being a provocation. Do I pray to a sequence 2 Angel of the Fate pathway? But I don't know their honorific names. Will Septon immediately grinned. There's a more convenient method. Who? Klein pressed in delight. The baby replied with a giggle. Empress of misfortune and horror. Chapter 937. Several days later. Empress of misfortune and horror. Isn't that the goddess? That's right, misfortune includes bad luck, a part of fate. The goddess has the corresponding authority, and can naturally give a response. By giving this suggestion, doesn't it mean that in Will Acceptan's eyes, he has always suspected that I'm Evernights blessed, it's just that I didn't notice it myself. It's the same as the answer I received about how I should get the high sequence Beyonder potion formula of the seer pathway. He is even more certain after what happened at St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein was first taken aback before he became enlightened. As though he was muttering to himself, he said, "If I were to pray to the goddess, no matter what symbols I choose, the final product's effect will likely be inclined towards the domain of bad luck." That's common sense. The baby wrapped in silver silk shouted. After obtaining confirmation, Klein felt more certain as he said with a smile, are you still named Will Acceptan?" He was very curious if he changed his name after being born. "If you like it, you can continue thinking so. However, my full name has already been changed to Will Series," the baby replied indifferently. Klein thought before asking, "If I want to deal with the wielder of 0-08, what suggestions do you have?" "I don't want to know about 0-08. I just wish to know if you have any suggestions." The plump baby looked at him as he suddenly opened his mouth and let out a loud cry. Wah! The corners of Klein's lips quivered. Upon seeing the maid about to wake up, he took a few steps back and vanished from the room with his two marionettes. Rorsted Sea. On the Future, which was docked in the Biome Resistance's private harbor. Katlia, who was holding a ritual, saw a drop of silver blood fly out of the illusory door that manifested itself from the candlelight. With just one glance at it, she hurriedly closed her eyes, despite wearing her heavy glasses. At that instant, it felt like an aloof and mysterious wheel was spinning in a circle, forming a silver snake that had its head connected to its tail. This made her repeat her previous thoughts as she thanked Mr. Fool 12 consecutive times, before returning to normal. It really is the blood of a mythical creature from the Fate domain, and its level is higher than an ordinary angel. Katlia ended the ritual in delight, and she took out a container she had prepared ahead of time, placing the drop of silver blood inside. After obtaining some information on the monster pathway from Queen Mystic, and learning the existence of Angel of Fate Ouroboros from Mr. Fool, she quickly came up with a guess as to who the blood belonged to. Perhaps it's the one from the Life School of Thought. Or there might be another sequence, one angel. Regardless, Mr. Fool is able to use at least 2 angels in the real world. Along with that ancient bane that I can't be certain of, aside from the lack of sealed artifacts, the faction that believes in Mr. Fool is enough to match that of Orthodox churches. Even the Element Dawn and Moses' ascetic order can't compare. As expected of an awakening ancient god. Increasingly filled with awe, Katlia drew a gasp and began considering her matters. Her other preparations were rather smooth sailing. Without any accidents, all she needed was to wait a month or so to attempt advancing to Sequence 4 to obtain godhood. Overcast with heavy, black clouds, silver lightning would occasionally streak across the sky, illuminating the desolate plains and the winding rivers that ran dry. And in the middle of the plains, where the river made a half circle, black, stacked shadowy outlines loomed. It was a lifeless city. After several days of traveling, the team led by the chief of the City of Silver's 6-member council, Demon Hunter Colin Iliad, finally arrived at their destination Noise City. The team was a small one. Excluding Colin, there were only 4 other members. They were the 6-member council elder, Shepherd Lovia, 2 Sequence 5 guardians, Leger and Gonlin, as well as Sequence 6 notary Derek Berg. The overall strength of the team wasn't weaker than a complete expedition team. It was perhaps even stronger. According to Colin Iliad, this was because Noise City was filled with monsters, making it very dangerous. Shapeshifters were adept at disguises, and they enjoyed making use of the trust between teammates. Therefore, the smaller the expedition team, the better. And since there were fewer people, there was undoubtedly a need to prepare it with a stronger team. Was as they watched the city in front of them, which was covered in mist, one that couldn't be lit up despite the lightning, demon hunter Colin drew the 2 swords on his back. Unhurriedly, he slathered a silver-gray ointment on one, and a golden liquid on the other. He then stabbed the 2 swords in front of him. He then removed 3 small metal bottles from a hidden compartment on his belt, pulled out the stopper, and gulped the contents of the potion. Meanwhile, Leger and Gonlin had made preparations for combat. Derek Berg held his hammer with one hand as he opened up his other palm. With a solemn tone, he said in Jotun, "God says it's effective." Silently, Colin Iliad and company felt that the consumed potion, the conjured dawn, and the slathered ointment had been significantly augmented. Right on the heels of that, concentric rings of warm light emanated out, endowing the expedition team with courage and strength. After Derek used Holy Oath to boost his agility, Colin shot a glance at Lovia, who was holding an animal hide lantern and standing silently observing. He then turned his head to point at the perimeter of Noise City, which was more than 10 meters away. He said to the teenager, who was once again a little taller, "Use your ability to light up the streets ahead." After saying that, he surveyed his surroundings and added, "Once we enter Noise City, make sure we do not separate." A few days ago, I had already introduced the more active monsters that hide away in the darkness in this region. All of you should be aware of how separating will be utilized by the shapeshifter. Gonlin was a beautiful, female warrior who was 4 to 5 meters tall. Upon hearing that, she thought and asked, "Then should we make use of this to hunt the shapeshifter?" "It's best that we do not do so. It's just too dangerous. Also, it's very easy to end up killing our own teammates, or end up becoming lost in Noise City forever," the grizzled Colin Iliad seriously warned. Derek looked at the silent city that was cloaked in thin mist as he subconsciously asked, "Your Excellency, was this city also under the Giant King's court?" "Yes, but it's very close to a kingdom ruled by another ancient god," Colin answered patiently. Holding 2 iron-black poles, the 2-4-meter-tall Leger pressed with intrigue, "Which ancient god?" "King of demonic wolves, the Annihilator Fleegria." "Is that so?" Derek remembered the chief's introduction, took a step forward, and extended his arms. Pure, radiant sunlight emitted from his body, illuminating the either collapsed or rotting buildings, the grayish-white stone-paved streets, and the extremely silent city perimeter. Derek and company saw figures appear on the streets. They were either wearing linen robes or animal hides, as though they were busily going on about their day. Upon sensing the sunlight's illumination, they silently turned their heads in unison, and looked at the City of Silver expedition team. Bancy Harbor at night would occasionally have ravens or other birds calling out. It accentuated the gloom and deathly silence of the ruins. Even the sounds of crashing waves were unable to wash away that feeling as believers of the Lord of Storms and crew members of the Blue Avenger. The sailors were bold, especially when they believed that there might be gold or valuables hidden within the collapsed buildings. It spurred them on, sapping away any fear that might exist. The moment they arrived, they rushed down the ship and began searching the area in groups of 2 or 3. Alger didn't follow them as he strolled through the ruins alone, in search of any marks that appeared after Bancy Harbor's destruction. As he walked, with him wearing the Whip of Mind ring and having the blade of poison slung by his waist, he came to a collapsed building with crumbling walls and a door that was only a few pieces of charred wood. If I remember correctly, this was the telegraph office of Bancy Harbor. Alger nodded slightly as he approached, and did a slight inspection. He then saw a relatively empty area amidst the rubble. The ground was parched black with 2 blood-red silhouettes. It was as though 2 people had been lying there, only to be squashed flat. And this had been months ago. Yet, the 2 streaks of blood remained fresh, as though they still contained some degree of vitality to it. Alger's forehead throbbed as he felt as though he could imagine the vileness before Bancy Harbor was destroyed. He swept his gaze and suddenly saw a picture engraved on a crumbling wall beside the 2 blood-colored figures. It was a spot that the moonlight could hardly shine onto. The picture was very simple, and it wasn't even colored. It was of an armored monster with a squid's head that wielded a trident. Lightning swirled around it as waves surged at its feet. Behind it was a cape formed by bird feathers. Alger's eyes widened suddenly as he felt a tumultuous storm rage within him. He recognized who the monster was representing because the sun had once depicted it before. It was the warped version of the Lord of Storms according to Rose Redemption. And could this picture's appearance implied that a Rose Redemption member had previously come to Bansi Harbor, and they had drawn this picture after the building collapsed? Otherwise, it was impossible for the mural to not be damaged. It happened to fill an abnormal, crumbling wall. This should be what the world wanted me to find in Bansi Harbor. He's pursuing Rose Redemption? Alger muttered silently to himself as he raised his right hand. He had planned on destroying the picture, but after some thought he retracted his arm, circling around Bansi Harbor's former telegraph office as though he hadn't discovered anything. He then walked in another direction. Chapter 938. Riding above the endless gray fog, in the magnificent and ancient palace. The warped picture of the Lord of Storms, one that's suspected to be left behind by a Rose Redemption member. Red Angel Medici is one of the founders of Rose Redemption. Klein sat in the high-back chair belonging to the Fool as he silently looked at the crimson star representing the hanged man. Using his feedback, he had basically confirmed that the one possessing Ensanguil was the Red Angel evil spirit. In the eternal silence, Klein silently sat at the seat of honor of the modeled table, as though he had become a deity's statue. After an unknown period of time, he nodded indiscernibly and slowly exhaled. His figure vanished and returned to the real world. He continued his nap without thinking of any plans or considering anything related to Ensanguil. He slept till the next morning and got out of bed. He repeated his habits over the past few days, walking to the window barefooted and drawing the windows. On the streets outside the hotel, Danitz, who had dressed up like a West Balam native with an extra hooded cloak, held his iron-black boxing glove close to his chest before rushing to the square on his right. Based on his previous report, Klein knew that he was meeting one of the local ruling factions today to understand their stance on the arms deal. Anderson didn't follow. He had ruffled his parted short blonde hair in a mess as he leisurely strolled around the perimeter of the square, sat down, and wore a funny-looking puppet over his left black-gloved hand, and began putting on a ventriloquist act for the people who walked by. The man and puppet each had different voices as they mocked each other with witty remarks. It was quite good at attracting attention. The only problem was that it was done in the Intis language and not Dutanese. Few people understood it, so after standing around to watch for a moment, they walked off. Klein focused on the Fog Sea's strongest hunter with the same expression as before. His eyes betrayed how deep in thought he was. East Balam, in the temporary office for SOAS Red Gloves. Cindy, who had long wine-red hair, walked in with a few telegrams as she said excitedly, "New clues." "What clues?" SOAS put down the white porcelain coffee mug in his hand as Leonard and Daly cast their gazes to the door. As Cindy handed the telegram to her captain, she said, "Emperor Rosel's quote, 'Wherever he steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him,' really makes sense. We've found people witnessing Ensanguil in several places, forming a complete trajectory. From this, we've realized that Ensanguil's thoughts seem to be contradictory. He often approaches the colonies of Intis, staying for a short moment, before leaving it. He then approaches it once again, and leaves it repeatedly as though. Isn't this what Klein mentioned? That his actions are inconsistent?" Leonard was delighted as he offered a better description for Cindy. "As though he's oscillating." "Yes, oscillating." Cindy heaved a sigh of relief and began describing the findings. In addition, Ensanguil has killed a few Intis military spies and has purchased several Beyonder ingredients. It's unknown what he's trying to do. Leonard deliberated and said, "Which pathways Beyonder ingredients are being bought by Ensanguil?" "They are from the warrior, hunter, and bard pathways." Cindy pointed at the few telegrams that Captain SOAS was reading. "Indeed, there's the hunter pathway." Having failed to find an excuse to get his teammates to take notice of hunter-related clues, Leonard exhaled silently, and no longer had any doubts regarding Klein's theory. He believed it to be the truth. Next, how should I make everyone realize that Ince has been possessed by an evil spirit of the hunter pathway? Leonard fell into deep thought. He waited until Soas finished reading the telegram and handed it to the other teammates before he came up with something. He decided to take a risk. Before he spoke, he subconsciously glanced at Daily Simone, dressed in a spirit medium's attire. This lady lowered her hand slightly, indicating that he shouldn't be too anxious, and to stop whatever he was about to attempt. Ma'am Daly is telling me that it isn't time, that I should wait for a better opportunity? Amidst his hesitation, he saw Daly flick the telegram in her hand and looked around the room. I have an idea. What is it? Soas asked. Daly smiled. I suspect that Nsangwil is possessed by an evil spirit. She just said it like that. She will be suspected. Leonard jumped in fright. Without waiting for Soas, Cindy and company to raise their doubts, Daly continued. Nsangwil was once a gatekeeper, and now he's a night watcher. His body can accommodate evil spirits and use their powers. Furthermore, he also has 0-08's help. If I were him, I'd definitely try to seek out stronger evil spirits and raise my strength as much as possible. This way, before he obtains complete control over the evil spirit, there will be backlashes. Nsangwil will take actions that seem contradictory. This can explain what's mentioned on the telegram. In addition, haven't we been puzzled as to why Nsangwil has been trying to contact important members of the numinous episcopate, and we had come up with various theories? Perhaps getting them to help him exorcise, purify, or completely control the evil spirit is his goal. Soas thought for a moment and deliberated over his words. That possibility cannot be ruled out, but this is fundamentally a subjective theory of yours. How did you come up with this? Which details gave you the inspiration? Leonard became nervous as Daly chuckled. This is a woman's intuition. It's just like how I know your thoughts, as well as those of the rest of you at times. Besides, since this is a discussion and analysis, we should list down all the possibilities. We should then eliminate the possibilities based on the actual investigations. This will aid us in finding the correct answer. Therefore, we need to let our thoughts wander. No matter how ridiculous the idea is, we must dare to propose it. From the various details we obtained from our feedback, I believe my theory is the most likely one. Ma'am Daly sure is good with words. At least, she has convinced me. She raised the theory of an evil spirit's possession to protect me and direct the risk towards herself. On this matter regarding Nsangwil, she seems willing to take on everything. Leonard became enlightened as he felt poignant. After hearing Daly's reply, Soas nodded slightly. Indeed, since this is a discussion, we shouldn't limit our thoughts. The possibility of an evil spirit possession scenario is quite high. I'll report this to Her Excellency Goddess's Eye. I'll leave it to the Archbishop and high-ranking deacons to decide the subsequent investigations. After all, we know too little about 0-08. The Red Gloves team led by Soas discovered Nsangwil's abnormalities from the feedback from various telegrams. Daily Simone used this opportunity to mention the assumption of an evil spirit's possession, and had received a unanimous agreement. She claimed it to be a reasonable theory, but she was already in the know. She had learned it from Leonard Mitchell, who has a parasite, and Leonard Mitchell's information source came from a letter sent by Rionette Tinker, who could be the one who mailed it. Meanwhile, Leonard Mitchell and Daily Simone had already suspected that the evil spirit possessing Nsangwil belongs to the hunter pathway. A classic quill dabbed in black ink was writing rapidly on an ordinary notebook as though it was held by an invisible hand. Suddenly, a silently pale hand reached out and grabbed the quill. The owner of that hand had dark blonde hair with facial features akin to a classic sculpture. One of his eyes was so blue that it was nearly black, and the other was filled with small but obvious blood vessels. He lowered his wrist and continued writing. But is this the truth to the matter? Will everything develop according to what Daily Simone, Leonard Mitchell, and Soas Red Gloves team have in mind? In the forsaken land of the gods, in Noise City which couldn't be illuminated by the lightning, the figures looked over without making any sound, giving Derek a fright. He nearly stopped the illumination effect as he dodged to avoid facing them directly. However, having trained from a young age, and with his experience over the past year, He didn't end up flustered. He didn't rush to end it as he forcefully held back his horror and waited for the chief to give the next order. Two dark green, complicated symbols appeared in Colin Iliad's eyes. He took in the streets that were blanketed with faint mist and the seemingly normal figures which didn't take any action. Suddenly, he grunted and genuflected, his hands grabbing the two swords that were stabbed in the ground. At the back of his neck, his bluish-black skin swelled a little as indescribable and complicated mysterious symbols appeared. They were half illusory and half real as they crept to either higher or lower levels. At the same time, Shepherd Lovia let out a painful grunt as she raised her hands and held her head, vomiting some blobs of squirming flesh and blood. Her palms and her body seemed to have silver armor strangely appear, overlapping on top of her. "Stop," Demon Hunter Colin muttered softly 1 second later. Derek hurriedly ended the illumination and allowed the thin mist to cloak the figures, allowing the dead silence to once again blanket the ancient noise city. Everything quickly returned to its former form as Colin Iliad slowly got up. He cast his heavy gaze at the tower, cathedral, and other buildings that could barely be made out through the thin mist. "It's a bit different from my last expedition. I'm not sure why there are such changes either." Demon Hunter Colin retracted his gaze as he surveyed the team members. "Do you have any ideas or thoughts?" Shepherd Lovia had already crouched down to pick up the blobs of flesh and blood that had fallen to the ground. However, she wasn't in a rush to stuff them into her mouth, to munch on them before swallowing. She offered, "We can change directions and explore Noise City's other entrances. Perhaps we might discover something." She had been maintaining her silence and kept the attitude of a spectator the entire journey. This was the first time she was voicing out her thoughts and giving her point of view. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.